I was taught early in my career that silence in the forest was not empty. It was a kind of language, a warning, a prayer, and sometimes a threat. The first time I realized how heavy silence could feel was not when I was young and learning to track elk. Not even when I spent long winters alone in a cabin where the walls creaked like old bones. But years later, after I had become a ranger responsible for one of the loneliest sections of the northern forest, that's when silence began speaking to me in ways I didn't want to understand. My name doesn't matter as much as the ground I walked. I was in my mid-30s then, stationed in a remote district of the northern Rockies, where the mountains lifted like broken teeth and the valleys were strangled with lodgepole pine. I had spent years hiking trails, tending campgrounds, answering calls from lost hikers or reckless hunters, doing the kind of work that wears on you but also builds you into someone who can hold steady against storms. I knew the people of the area. Stubborn locals who distrusted outsiders, hunters who carried stories older than the ranger station itself, and the families who returned summer after summer to let their children run wild under the shadow of peaks. The locals always had warnings. Don't follow strange whistles. Don't camp near the caves. Don't wander the old logging roads after dark. At first, I chalked it up to folklore. Every forest community has its tales. But the longer I stayed, the more I began to understand that those warnings weren't for tourists. They were for us, the ones who stayed after the sun went down, the ones who didn't get to leave when the air turned heavy. One night, a patrol took me deeper into the backcountry than usual. The forest had that kind of twilight where shadows stretched like tar across the ground, and the light seemed to fall away all at once. I stopped near a tree line that bordered an open meadow. The grass swayed unnaturally, though there was no wind. That's when I felt it, a sense I wasn't alone. The air grew still, pressing against me like water. I told myself it was a cougar, maybe a black bear. But then came a sound that made every instinct in me seize. It wasn't a roar, wasn't a growl. It was a whistle, low, sharp, drawn out in a pattern too precise for an animal. 3 short notes, then silence. I froze. My flashlight cut across the tree line, but the beam seemed swallowed before it reached the trunks. The silence that followed was unbearable, like the whole forest was holding its breath. Then something shifted in the shadows, tall, broader than any man, still as stone. I couldn't see its face, but I felt its eyes, watching me, waiting. I wanted to move, to call on the radio, to raise my rifle, but my body wouldn't listen. For the first time in years of working alone in the wilderness, I felt panic, sharp, icy panic that started in my chest and worked into my bones. I turned, forcing myself to walk away, not run, though every nerve screamed at me to flee. I made it to the truck, slammed the door, and sat with my hands trembling on the wheel until I convinced myself it had been a trick of distance, of shadows. That's how reason works out here. You hold on to it even when your gut knows better. But that was only the beginning. In the weeks that followed, little things began to shift around me. At my cabin, I'd hear tapping at the window in the small hours of the night. Always 3 knocks, slow and deliberate. When I opened the door, the yard would be empty, the trees still. Sometimes I'd wake to the smell of damp earth inside the cabin, like fresh soil had been overturned just beyond my walls. And always that feeling, something watching from the edge of the tree line. Once, on a routine check near a trailhead, I found a campsite abandoned. The fire had been left smoldering, gear scattered, food half prepared. No signs of struggle, no tracks leading away. Just gone. I reported it, searched, filed it as a likely case of hikers moving on carelessly. But when I looked back at that fire ring, I noticed something buried in the ash. A shape pressed into the soil, too large for a boot, too narrow for a bear's paw. To this day, I can't describe it without feeling my throat tighten. It looked like a hand, but wrong. Too long, too heavy. The locals didn't flinch when I mentioned it. One old trapper spat tobacco into the dirt and said, "You saw him." I asked who he meant, but he only muttered that some things didn't need names because names gave them power. He wouldn't say more. That silence, that refusal, was worse than any warning. It left me with my own thoughts, my own fear. The strangest encounter happened when I was sent to clear storm damage along a remote road. The rain had been relentless, leaving the air thick and metallic. The forest felt wrong, too quiet, like everything living had hidden itself. I moved from one downed log to the next, chainsaw growling, until I reached a bend where the trees opened into a ravine. That's when I smelled it. Not rot, not animal musk, but something like wet iron mixed with the sourness of old sweat. It turned my stomach instantly. I shut the saw off and listened. A crack echoed, followed by something moving heavy through the undergrowth. Then, clearer than I wanted to believe, a sound like a voice. Low, garbled, trying to form words but breaking into guttural snarls. I stood there, unable to move, gripping the saw like a shield. The sound grew closer, not rushing, not charging, but steady, deliberate, as if it knew I wouldn't run. I wanted to shout, to tell it to stop, but my throat refused. Then the brush parted just enough to show me an outline. Massive, upright, hair matted and dripping from the rain. Its shoulders hunched as it leaned forward, and even through the mist, I knew those eyes were on me. The chainsaw roared back to life in my shaking hands, and the moment it did, the figure stopped. Silence crushed the space between us. Then it stepped backward into the brush, vanishing without sound. I left the road blocked that night. I didn't care. Some things aren't worth clearing, but fear doesn't stay confined to one encounter. It begins to creep into the edges of your life, into the corners of your vision. I started dreading dusk patrols, avoiding the trails that cut near ravines or caves. I didn't tell the other rangers, not because I thought they'd laugh, but because I suspected they already knew. Some of them carried the same hollow look in their eyes when certain topics came up, the same instinct to change the subject, and I couldn't admit it, not even to myself, that the forest I had loved, the forest I had sworn to protect, had turned into something I barely recognized, something alive in ways I couldn't explain. The cave came later, and the cave changed everything. The cave came later, and I almost wish it hadn't, because the things you see in daylight, you can still convince yourself they belong to the natural order of the world. The cave was different. The cave was where reason went to die. It started with a missing hiker, a young man, 24, who had parked his car near the North Access Road and vanished into the timber. His family called him seasoned, but the locals said he was arrogant, moving off trail in an area he had no business exploring. My orders were simple: follow the logging spur, cut into the ridge where his boot prints had been found, and trace him until I had something worth reporting. That ridge was brutal, steep, slick with moss and runoff. Each step sank into soil that smelled of rust and mushrooms. Ravens followed me, their wings cutting shadows across the ground, their cries echoing like something mocking me. I don't like to talk about omens, but that day they felt like more than birds. About 3 miles in, I found the prints again, veering away from the marked route. They led me toward a cluster of boulders at the base of a sheer cliff. And there it was, a mouth in the stone, dark, wet, uninviting. A cave I had never marked on any of my maps. The boot prints ended there. I stood at the entrance for a long time, listening. The air that drifted out was colder than the mountain air behind me, and it carried with it a smell I already knew too well. Damp earth, wet iron, that same metallic tang I had first smelled weeks before. It clung to the back of my throat, sour and heavy. The light from outside didn't reach far inside. Only the jagged rock teeth at the entrance caught the glow. Beyond that was black, absolute and waiting. I raised my flashlight, but the beam dissolved in the distance like it had been swallowed whole. I should have turned back. I should have called it in, marked the site, left it for a team to investigate. But I couldn't, because something deeper than duty was pulling at me. It wasn't just about the missing hiker anymore. It was about all the moments that had led me here. The tapping at the windows, the whistles in the night, the figure in the rain. It was as if the forest itself had been pushing me toward this place. So I stepped inside. The first thing I noticed was the sound. Not silence, never silence, but a low, constant hum like the earth itself was vibrating. The walls were slick with condensation, and every breath I took echoed unnaturally, bouncing back in strange rhythms. My flashlight beam quivered as though the air itself resisted being lit. The passage narrowed quickly, forcing me to squeeze sideways. My shoulder brushed stone that felt warm, like skin flushed with fever. That should have been impossible. Rock doesn't hold heat like that in a cave this deep, but I couldn't stop. I don't know how long I walked before the tunnel widened. Long enough for time to lose meaning. Long enough for my heartbeat to sync with that low hum until I couldn't tell if it was mine or the cave's. Then I saw something that froze me where I stood. Carvings. Crude, jagged carvings scratched into the stone walls. Not human letters, not shapes I could recognize, but spirals, lines, crude figures with elongated limbs. They were everywhere, gouged deep as if whatever had made them had claws instead of tools. Some of them looked fresh, the stone dust still loose at their base. The smell grew stronger, metallic, suffocating. My stomach churned, bile rising as I forced myself further in. And then, at the far end of the chamber, my light caught on something. A torn scrap of fabric, a backpack strap, a human boot, half buried in mud. The missing hiker had been here. I crouched, my gloved hand brushing the boot, and for a second, I thought I heard movement behind me. I swung the light back, but the tunnel was empty. The hum deepened, vibrating in my chest until I could feel it in my teeth. And then I realized it wasn't the cave humming. It was breathing. The walls expanded, contracted, the condensation trembling like sweat on skin. A low, guttural sound rose from the dark, not from one point, but from everywhere at once. A sound that wasn't human, but carried intent, like something forming syllables from deep within stone. I bolted. My boots splashed through mud, scraped against rock, as the tunnel seemed to shift around me. I swear it lengthened, each turn twisting me further away from the entrance. My flashlight beam flickered, stuttering with each breath I took. Behind me, I heard it. Heavy steps, not rushed but steady, following without effort. The whistle came again. 3 sharp notes, low and deliberate. This time they echoed inside my skull, like they weren't being made with lungs, but with thought. I stumbled, fell hard against the stone, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. The light rolled from my hand, spinning across the floor, and in that brief circle of light, I saw it. A shadow too large to belong to me, rising from the wall, limbs bent in ways that made no sense. Its head tilted, long, matted hair brushing the ceiling, and those eyes that gleamed not with reflection, but with a dull, animal intelligence. It wasn't crouched, it wasn't hiding, it stood tall as if it owned the space, as if I was the intruder. And in that moment, I understood what the locals meant when they refused to name it. Because giving something a name makes it real. And this was already too real. I forced myself up, snatched the light, and ran. I didn't care that my chest burned, didn't care that my vision blurred with panic. I ran until the cold air of the outside hit my face, until I fell into the dirt and daylight stabbed at my eyes. I don't know how long I lay there. Long enough for the hum to fade, long enough for the smell to thin, but not long enough to forget. When I finally staggered back to the truck, I radioed in a false report. Said the terrain was unstable, too dangerous for a proper search. I couldn't tell them what I had seen. Not because I thought they wouldn't believe me, but because a part of me feared they would. Since that day, I can't look at a cave without feeling that breath on my skin, without hearing that low whistle in the back of my mind. I started locking the cabin windows, though I knew it wouldn't matter. At night, the tapping continued. Always 3 knocks, always just enough to keep me awake. And sometimes when I walk the tree line at dusk, I catch sight of it again. Not close, never close. Just far enough that its shape blurs with the shadows, just far enough that I could still lie to myself. But I don't. Not anymore. Because I know the truth. Something was watching me from the tree line, and it still is. I stopped pretending to sleep after that. Night had become something I didn't survive so much as endure. sitting upright on the edge of my bunk in the cabin, listening to the weight of the dark pressing against the walls. The forest at night used to soothe me, the wind moving through the pines like a slow breath, owls calling from the distance. Now, it was just static, soundless, and yet charged, as if the whole world outside was leaning toward my cabin, listening. I told myself the knocks at the window were just branches. The smell of damp earth inside the cabin was just a leak in the foundation. The shapes I saw at dusk were tricks of failing light. But the human mind can only stretch a lie so far before it starts to break. I began to notice small things, tracks where there shouldn't have been tracks. A tree trunk near the cabin, freshly gouged, the bark stripped away high above where a bear could reach. The faint echo of whistling, 3 notes, always 3, carried on the wind no matter which way it blew. My hands trembled even when I tried to write my daily reports, my pen scratching unevenly across the paper. The worst was the feeling that I wasn't just being watched. I was being studied. One evening in late autumn, when the sky went dark too quickly and the wind came down from the ridges like a knife, I returned from patrol to find the cabin door standing open. I always locked it. Always. My rifle was still on the rack by the door, but the air inside the cabin smelled stronger than before. Wet iron, sweat, soil. Something had been here. My bedroll was unrolled and damp, as though something had lain there. My boots had been moved, set neatly at the foot of the bed. A single pine cone sat in the center of the table where I kept my maps. It wasn't the kind that fell near my cabin. It was from higher ground, from the ridges near that cave. I didn't call anyone. I couldn't, because calling meant admitting it, and admitting it meant letting it cross some invisible threshold. Instead, I shut the door, bolted it, and sat in the dark with the rifle across my knees. That was the night it came closest. It started just after midnight. A faint tapping on the window above my bed, so soft I thought I imagined it. Then again, 3 taps. I held my breath, gripped the rifle tighter. The room smelled like a wet animal had been inside for days. Silence, then the whistling. Low, deliberate, just outside the cabin. 3 notes. My heart slammed against my ribs, my vision tunneling. I stood slowly, every movement deliberate, the rifle heavy in my hands. My voice cracked when I finally spoke, though I barely recognized it as mine. Go away. No response. Just the soft scuff of something moving outside. I stepped toward the window. The pane was streaked with condensation from my own breath, making the world outside a blur. I wiped it with my sleeve, and for a second I wished I hadn't. There it was, standing just beyond the tree line. Tall, hunched, its head nearly brushing a low branch, hair matted with what might have been mud, its arms too long, fingers nearly touching the ground. The glow of its eyes wasn't like an animal's. It didn't catch the light. It made its own. Faint, dull, but alive. It tilted its head when I looked at it. Not like a predator, like something curious. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Then it stepped forward, one long, deliberate stride out of the shadow of the trees and into the weak moonlight. My body acted on instinct. I raised the rifle, finger on the trigger, the sight trembling as I aimed. "Don't," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I was speaking to it or to myself. It stopped, tilted its head again. The whistling came once more, but this time I could see its chest expand, see the sound leave it. It wasn't a call to lure me. It was speaking. I fired. The sound of the shot cracked the night wide open, echoing off the trees, rolling back at me like thunder. The figure flinched but didn't fall. Instead, it stepped backward into the dark, swallowed by the tree line as if it had never been there. Silence. No whistling. No movement. Just the smell of gunpowder in my cabin and my own ragged breathing. I lowered the rifle slowly, the weight of it suddenly unbearable. My knees gave out, and I sat on the floor, staring at the door until the first pale light of dawn bled into the windows. When I stepped outside, there were no tracks, no blood. Nothing disturbed except a single pine cone placed carefully on my doorstep. That was when I realized the forest wasn't going to let me leave untouched. The days that followed blurred together. I moved through my patrols in a daze, eyes scanning the tree line, ears straining for that whistle. I stopped logging my reports. I stopped answering the radio. The other rangers started calling, their voices distant and worried, but I couldn't pick up, because I knew if I opened my mouth, if I tried to explain, something inside me would crack. I began dreaming of the cave. Not just dreams, memories replaying, warped and wrong. The humming deeper, the carvings shifting, the shadows standing at the far end of the tunnel, waiting. In the dreams, it spoke words I couldn't understand, syllables like stones grinding together, promising something I didn't want to hear. And each time I woke, I swore I smelled that same damp, metallic air inside my cabin. One evening, I tried to drive out, packed my bag, threw it in the truck, started down the access road. But the deeper I drove into the trees, the more disoriented I became. The road that should have led to the highway twisted, turned back on itself, ended at the base of a ridge that shouldn't have been there. My GPS flickered, spinning in circles. No signal. I turned back, but the road behind me wasn't the road I had taken. I drove until the fuel gauge fell, until the sun went down and the forest closed in like a fist. At some point, I found myself back at the cabin without remembering the turns. The truck engine sputtered and died. I sat there in the driver's seat, hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles whitened. Outside, the forest had gone still again. Too still. Then the whistling started, 3 notes. Close this time, right outside the driver's side window. I didn't look. I didn't move. I just sat there, my chest tightening until I couldn't tell if I was breathing or drowning. When I finally dared to look, there was nothing there, only the tree line, patient and dark. That night, I stayed awake until dawn, waiting for the next sound. It never came, but I knew it would. It always does. And somewhere in the middle of that endless waiting, something inside me shifted. The fear didn't leave, it became something colder, harder. Not courage, never courage, but a kind of grim understanding. This was no accident. This was no stray creature passing through my territory. I was the one inside its territory. And it was telling me, in its own slow, deliberate way, that the forest I thought I knew belonged to it, long before it ever belonged to me. The breaking point came when I realized I couldn't live another day waiting. Waiting for the knocks, waiting for the whistle, waiting for those eyes at the edge of the tree line. Fear eats a person slowly, like rot. I could feel it chewing at me, hollowing me out from the inside, and yet a part of me knew, if I didn't go back into the forest, into the cave, into whatever had chosen me, I would never be free of it. That morning, the air was brittle with frost. Every blade of grass rhymed in silver. The sky had the pale wash of early winter, a white glare that stripped the color out of everything. I strapped on my pack, slung my rifle across my shoulder, and didn't bother to leave a note. What would I have written? Gone to confront the thing that's been living in my nightmares? No one would have read it anyway. No one would have believed. The forest greeted me with its stillness, and I walked deeper than I had in weeks, every step heavy but certain. I didn't mark the trail. I didn't radio in. I followed the pull in my gut, that same quiet gravity that had drawn me to the cave the first time. My boots sank into soil that was still frozen on top but soft beneath, releasing that damp, mineral smell I had come to associate with it. Hours passed. The trees thickened, branches hanging heavy like curtains, blotting out the weak sunlight. I could feel it before I saw it, the low vibration under my feet, the faint hum in my bones. When the cave finally opened before me, I wasn't surprised. The mouth of the cave yawned dark and wet, exactly as I remembered. But this time, I didn't hesitate. I stepped inside, flashlight beam cutting through the black. The hum grew louder with each step and the walls seemed closer, slick with condensation that glistened like sweat. Deeper and deeper I went, until the carvings appeared again. Jagged spirals, stretched figures etched into stone, more numerous than I remembered. Some of them seemed to twist when my light passed over them, shifting into new shapes before returning to stillness. I forced myself not to look too long, not to let the meaning creep in. The smell of iron thickened, gagging me, but I pressed on until the tunnel opened into the chamber. That same chamber where I had found the boot, the strap, the remains of the missing hiker. They were still there, or what was left of them. The boot lay half buried, the fabric damp and rotting. No bones, no body. And that's when I heard it. Not the whistle this time. Breathing, deep, guttural, rhythmic, not echoing, not distant, close. The beam of my light trembled as I lifted it. It was there, standing at the far edge of the chamber, massive shoulders hunched, arms dangling almost to the ground. Hair clung to its body in thick mats dripping with condensation. Its chest rose and fell slowly, each breath rattling the chamber walls. And its eyes, those dull, glowing eyes, locked onto mine. I froze. The rifle was in my hands, but my arms felt useless, heavy as stone. The whistle came then, 3 notes, rolling low and deliberate, filling the chamber until it rattled my teeth. My ears rang with it, my vision blurring at the edges. And then it spoke. Not in words I understood, but in a guttural, grinding language that scraped through the stone and into my skull. My legs buckled, and I fell to my knees, the flashlight rolling across the mud. The chamber plunged into half-darkness, the beam pointing upward to catch its silhouette looming taller, closer. For one wild second, I thought it would strike, tear me apart and leave me with the rest of the missing. But it didn't. It crouched instead, lowering itself so its eyes were level with mine. The smell of its breath was overwhelming, metal, earth, sweat, something primal and old. It tilted its head like it always did, studying me. Not prey, not predator, something else. And in that unbearable silence between us, something in me broke. I realized the fear that had ruled me wasn't the point. The point was that it wanted me to know it was there, that it had always been here, watching, waiting, that the forest, the silence, the cave, all of it belonged to it. I was just a guest. My finger brushed the trigger, slowly, shaking. But before I could squeeze it, it reached out one long arm and pressed a hand, if you could call it that, against the stone wall beside me. The sound it made wasn't speech this time. It was a low vibration, a hum that sank into the walls, into the carvings, into me. And in that moment, I understood. Not in words, not in thoughts, but in feeling. I was being marked, not killed, marked, claimed. I don't remember leaving the cave. One moment I was on my knees, choking on that smell, that hum in my bones, those eyes burning into me. The next, I was stumbling out into daylight, gasping for air like I'd been underwater. The sky was already dimming, twilight sliding down the ridges. I had lost hours. Back at the cabin, everything felt different. The forest outside wasn't quiet anymore. It was alive, pulsing with the same hum I'd felt in the cave. The tree line wasn't just trees. It was a wall of watching eyes, patient and unblinking. That night, I didn't hear the knocks. I didn't hear the whistle. I heard the hum, steady and constant, as if the cave had followed me home. And I knew then that leaving wouldn't matter. You can't leave something that isn't bound by distance. You can't escape something that doesn't live in one place, but in the very silence between the trees, in the dark, you can't quite banish with a flashlight. I stayed in that cabin until the end of my assignment. When the day came to hand over the keys, I walked out without looking back. The next ranger shook my hand, smiling, asking how I'd liked the post. I lied, said it was quiet, said it was uneventful. But as I drove away, I glanced once into the rearview mirror. At the edge of the trees, where the cabin disappeared into shadow, something stood, watching. It didn't wave, it didn't move, it didn't have to. Because I already knew. Once the forest marks you, it never lets you go. And sometimes when I walk alone in a different forest, in a different state, far from that cabin, I still hear it. 3 sharp whistles, low and deliberate, and I know it's reminding me. It's still watching. The first time I opened the old logbook, my hands shook as if the paper itself had a pulse. The spine cracked with the sound of brittle bone, and dust floated into the cabin's stale air, catching in the thin beam of my lantern. I shouldn't have been inside that ranger station. It had been condemned for years, boarded up after black mold crept across the ceiling and water rot hollowed the floors. But I was drawn to it, the way a man presses on a bruise just to feel the pain again. My name isn't important anymore. Not in the way it used to be when people respected the badge stitched over my chest. I was a forest ranger, trusted to guard the trails, the lakes, the endless maze of timber that stretched across the Cascades. I'm in my 40s now, worn down by years of storms and silence, and the occasional drunk hiker who thought he could outwalk the wild. I thought I had seen everything: the mountain lions that stalk the edges of campgrounds, the black bears that lumber through coolers like thieves in the night, the sad inevitability of recovery missions when people vanish into canyons they thought they could climb back out of. But there are things the uniform never prepares you for, things that creep in sideways where your flashlight beam never lands. Things like this logbook. It had been left behind by a ranger I never met, someone stationed here decades ago before the building was sealed and abandoned. His handwriting, thin, slanted, and obsessive, still pressed deep grooves into the yellowed pages. As I read, my throat tightened. The entries weren't about wildlife or trail conditions. They were about sounds, shadows, and encounters that had no place in official records. And what disturbed me most was the way his fears mirrored my own. The first story he wrote down could have been mine. I remember it well. It was late autumn, the kind of night when the forest exhales mist and every sound feels too close, too damp. I was 23 then, fresh on the job, still proud enough to walk tall, even when my chest was hollow with fear. I had been patrolling near a cluster of caves not far from the Ridge Trail. The locals called it Hollow Mouth. They said it had no bottom, just a long throat of stone that swallowed light and echoed like a cathedral. I told myself I didn't believe the stories, but I also didn't let my boots take me too close to the edge. That night, though, something drew me closer. It wasn't curiosity. It was compulsion, the kind that slips in quietly and guides your steps before you realize you're moving. I followed the sound of dripping water, though no rain had fallen for weeks. It led me to the mouth of the cave, wide and black as the barrel of a rifle. And then I heard it, a voice. Low, patient, and impossibly human. It said my name, not loudly, not like a shout, just breathed it out as though the stone itself exhaled. My instincts screamed to run, but I froze, my boots clinging to the slick rock. The second time it said my name, it was closer, as if it had moved through the cave without sound. I turned and left, but not quickly, not running. Running would mean admitting it was real, and I wasn't ready for that. Back at the station, I told myself it had been the wind or water or my own pulse rattling through the hollows. That was the night I first learned how deeply a man can lie to himself. The logbook told the same story. The ranger before me, he too had heard a voice call his name from Hollow Mouth. His entry ended with 4 words underlined 3 times. It knows you now. I slammed the book shut that night, swore to myself I wouldn't read more. But of course, I did. Because once something touches your name, you can't let it go. The second entry dragged me into memories I'd tried to bury. It was early spring, snow still patching the slopes, when a hiker vanished. Her husband had reported her missing after she failed to return from a solo loop near Devil's Needle, a jagged basalt pillar that cuts up from the trees like the fang of something buried. I joined the search team. We combed ridges, checked ravines, shouted her name until lost all meaning. At dusk on the 3rd day, I spotted a scrap of red fabric snagged in the underbrush. My chest surged with hope, but when I reached it, I realized it was no jacket. It was a strip of fabric tied deliberately into a knot, as if marking a trail. I followed the knots deeper into the timber. Every 50 yards, another scrap. They led me to the base of Devil's Needle, where the shadows pooled thick as tar. That's where I saw her. She stood at the base of the pillar, barefoot in the snowmelt, her head tilted back as if listening to something far above. I shouted, but she didn't respond. My boots cracked over ice as I hurried closer. When I was 20 feet away, she turned. Her eyes, I'll never forget them. They weren't vacant, not exactly. They were wide with recognition, but not of me. It was as if she saw something behind me, through me, and whatever it was filled her with awe and terror all at once. "Do you hear it?" she whispered. I said no. She smiled just faintly and stepped backward into the pillar's shadow, and then she was gone. Not turned, not slipped, gone. I tore through the trees until my lungs tore with me, but there was nothing. No prints, no trail. When I returned with the others, the knots were gone too. Every strip of fabric vanished as though the forest had swallowed them whole. In the logbook, the old ranger described the same disappearance. A woman in red, drawn to the needle, vanishing in its shadow. He had underlined another sentence. They follow the knots because the knots aren't theirs. I read that line over and over until my vision blurred. My hands shook. My own notes from that search had never included the fabric. I had scrubbed that detail from my memory because I couldn't face what it implied, that something wanted me to follow, something that used markers like breadcrumbs to pull me closer. I should have closed the book then, burned it, sealed it back under rot and dust. But fear makes a man selfish. Once I saw my own past written in someone else's hand, I couldn't stop. I wanted to know what else he had seen. I wanted to know if he survived it. The third entry made me doubt I ever would. It described a night patrol near Larkspur Lake, where the ranger had found a cabin with smoke rising from its chimney. He knew no cabins existed there. He knew no permits allowed it, and yet he stepped inside. I could smell it as I read. Pine smoke, old wood, damp wool. I had smelled it once myself, the night I found that same cabin. I had been circling the lake after reports of campers hearing strange knocking at night. When I saw the chimney smoke, I felt relief at first. Maybe just a squatter, maybe someone who needed help. The cabin's door creaked open as if expecting me. Inside, a fire burned low, though the air was stale and cold. A table sat with 2 chairs. Only one chair faced the fire. The other was pulled slightly back, waiting. I didn't sit, but I felt it, the weight of expectation pressing me into that seat. And when the knocking came, it wasn't at the door. It was under the table, 3 sharp knocks against the wood beneath my knees. I fled. I didn't even shut the door. When I returned days later with another ranger, the cabin was gone. Only bare earth remained. And here it was, written decades before my own patrol, as if the same place appeared again and again, luring us in like moths to flame. I stopped reading after that. My chest was a furnace of dread, my lungs burning with smoke that wasn't there. I shoved the logbook into my pack and stumbled out of the abandoned station. But the truth is, once you read someone else's fears and find your own reflected back, you can't leave them behind. That night I dreamed of the cave, the pillar, the cabin. And in my dream, they weren't separate places at all. They were doors to the same room. And I knew, sooner or later, I would have to step inside. The following week, I tried to push it all aside. The cave, the woman, the cabin. I went back to routine patrols, filling my days with trail reports and maintenance logs, speaking to hikers with the forced cheer of someone pretending the forest was nothing more than trees and soil. But the logbook weighed on me. I carried it everywhere, stuffed in my pack like a parasite clinging to my spine. It wasn't just the words that unsettled me. It was the feeling that the book itself was watching. Some nights, when I laid it on the table in my cabin, I would catch the faintest sound, like paper shifting though no wind stirred. I'd wake at 3 a.m. to find it lying open to a page I hadn't reached yet. My rational mind told me I must have left it like that. But the part of me that still believed in instinct, the ranger who knew to listen to the hairs rising on the back of his neck, knew better. I lasted maybe 6 nights before I caved. I lit the lantern, opened the logbook, and kept reading. The next entry was dated almost 30 years before, yet it described an incident I myself had tried to bury. The ranger wrote about a boy, 11 years old, lost near Black Cedar Creek. Search teams scoured the drainage for 4 days. On the 5th, they found him. Or rather, they found him standing in the middle of the creek bed, dry as tinder, staring up into the canopy as though listening for something. That detail hit me like a hammer, because I had been there. I had seen him. It was the middle of a storm, rain coming down in curtains, and there he was, the boy, in a place that should have been raging with floodwater, but the creek bed around him was dry, not a drop soaking his boots. His face was blank, tilted skyward. When I called to him, his eyes snapped to me with such suddenness that I stumbled backward into the mud. He didn't move toward me. He didn't smile or cry. He only said one sentence in a voice too calm for someone lost. "They said you'd come." I don't remember carrying him out. I don't remember the walk back to base. I only remember blinking, and suddenly the boy was being lifted into an ambulance. His parents clutched him, sobbing with relief, and he looked at me over their shoulders with eyes like deep wells. The next day, the parents swore he was fine, but I never saw him again. And in the logbook, the ranger before me had written the same words. "They said you'd come." The air in my cabin seemed to thin as I read. My heartbeat filled my ears. 30 years apart, and yet the boy had said the same thing to two different men. Who were they? What did they want? I wanted to stop, but I couldn't. I flipped another page. The handwriting was shakier here, as though the man's hands had trembled while he wrote. He spoke of patrols where he found deer carcasses stacked neatly in piles, antlers pointing east, of nights where every bird fell silent at the same time, leaving only the sound of breath that wasn't his own. And then came an entry about fire. He had been monitoring a small blaze near the ridge. Nothing alarming, just a controlled burn that spread in a ring across dry grass. But then he noticed it wasn't spreading naturally. It was moving against the wind, curling in a spiral pattern, smoke rising in a perfect column. I felt my stomach drop because I had seen that too. It was midsummer, and lightning had sparked a fire up canyon. We'd hiked out to track its spread. At first, it seemed contained, but as night fell, the flames began to crawl in a way I still can't explain, snaking across the ground like handwriting, shaping themselves into a circle that widened and widened until the center went dark. And in that center, I thought I saw figures, thin, tall, indistinct against the glow. I remember thinking, fire doesn't write, fire doesn't draw. But there it was, curling letters into the night. The old ranger had seen the same. He had scrawled one desperate note at the bottom of the page. It's calling itself into the world. That night I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard crackling. Not of fire, but of pages turning, and still I read on. The next entry spoke of footsteps. The ranger had heard them outside his cabin at night, slow, deliberate, circling. He would fling the door open, shotgun in hand, only to find the clearing empty. But the snow betrayed what his eyes could not. In the morning, he saw tracks, bare feet, circling the cabin in wider and wider loops until they vanished into the trees. My throat tightened because I too had woken to footsteps in the snow. It was late January, bitter cold. I heard crunching outside my cabin. Not fast, not stumbling, measured as though someone was pacing just beyond the wall. When I swung the door open, nothing stirred but the trees. Yet at dawn, there they were. Footprints, no boots, no tread. Bare human feet pressed into snow so cold it should have flayed the skin raw. I followed them 100 yards into the timber before they simply stopped. No turning back, no scatter, no collapse, just gone. The logbook described the same, in words that burned themselves into my mind. They walk until they no longer need the ground. I slammed the book shut, gasping like I had been underwater too long. My cabin felt smaller, the walls closing in with each heartbeat. My pulse was a drum in my skull. The forest had always been my home, my refuge, but now I felt it pressing on me like a living thing, an adversary too vast to fight. That night, I left the logbook closed on the table, but when I woke before dawn, the cabin reeked of smoke. Not fire smoke, but the acrid stench of burned paper. The book sat open, its pages unscorched, yet the air tasted like ash. The lantern sputtered, though I hadn't lit it, and on the page, written in handwriting that wasn't there before, was a sentence that froze my blood. Why do you keep running from your own name? I shoved the book into my pack, stormed out into the freezing dark, and hiked until my legs gave out. The forest swallowed me whole, branches clawing my arms, wind shrieking through black pines like laughter. I collapsed beside a stream, chest heaving, the logbook digging into my back like a stone. And as I lay there trembling, I knew this wasn't the end. The logbook wasn't just a record of the past, it was a map, a guide. And I was being led somewhere I had no choice but to go. The cave, the pillar, the cabin, the boy, the fire, the footsteps, all doors to the same room. And I knew, with a clarity sharp as broken glass, that the room was waiting for me. I woke stiff and frozen by the stream, the logbook pressed against my ribs as though it had grown there overnight. My breath poured white into the air, vanishing just as quickly as it came, and I felt the kind of bone-deep exhaustion you don't recover from with coffee or sleep. Something inside me had shifted. Before, the forest had been a place I could read, a terrain of maps, trails, and patterns. Now it felt unrateable. Every tree turned at a slant, every sound carrying double meaning. I should have gone back to base, reported myself unfit, handed in my badge before whatever this was consumed me whole. But I didn't. Instead, I opened the logbook again. I told myself it was because I needed to know what came next, that I couldn't afford to be blindsided. But deep down, I knew the truth. The book had me. It wasn't just a record, it was a hook in my chest, tugging me forward. The entry I opened began with a single line written in larger, darker script than the rest. The forest is not silent, it only pretends. He wrote about a patrol where he had noticed the absence of sound. Not unusual at first. Sometimes the birds go quiet when a predator is near or when the weather shifts, but this was different. He described standing on a ridge and realizing he couldn't hear his own breathing, though his chest was rising and falling. The silence had consumed even him. He had waved his arms, stomped his boots, clapped his hands, and the forest remained utterly mute. Reading those words made my skin crawl because I had lived a moment like that. It was early summer, and I was checking campsites after a busy holiday weekend. Families had left trash, fuss, and I was hauling bags down toward the service road when it hit me. Silence. Not the stillness of dawn or the hush before a storm. This was emptiness, a void where sound should have been. My boots crunched gravel, but no sound reached my ears. I slapped the side of my truck so hard my hand went numb, but it was like my ears had been severed from the world. And then faintly, I heard something, a whisper. Not words, just the shape of sound without voice, threading through the trees. I froze, heart rattling. It was behind me, then to my left, then ahead, though nothing moved. When it ended, the sounds of the forest returned at once, crashing back like a tide. I dropped the trash bags and left them to rot, too shaken to care. The old ranger had ended that entry with a warning. When the forest hides your sound, it's because something else wants to be heard. I closed the book, but the words clung to me. That night, lying in my bunk, I strained for silence the way a man strains for music. And I found it. At 3 a.m, the forest outside went mute. I could feel my breath in my lungs, but my ears were deaf to it. Then, from somewhere just beyond the window, I heard the whisper. Slow, patient, forming my name. I pressed the pillow over my head, shivering until dawn. When I woke, the logbook had slid from the table to the floor, lying open as if it had crawled closer to me. On its page, in the same thin script, was a description of a dream. He dreamed of a cave filled with roots, dangling like cords from the ceiling, each root attached to a face. Faces of those lost hikers, blank-eyed, mouths half open. The roots pulsed, feeding, keeping them alive but hollow. He wrote that he woke choking, his throat clogged with dirt. I had never had that dream before. But that morning, after reading it, I did. I found myself in darkness, roots swaying above me, brushing my hair, my cheeks. Faces hung like lanterns, their lips moving in silence. I reached up and felt one root twitch beneath my hand, wet and warm, like a vein. When I pulled, the face that had been blank before opened its eyes. They were mine. I woke gagging, my tongue thick with soil. I spat black grit into my hand and felt my stomach turn, and still I kept reading. The ranger's entries grew more frantic, the handwriting jagged, ink blotched with sweat or tears. He wrote about shadows that stretched too long, about reflections in water that didn't match his movements, about doors opening in trees that closed before he could prove they existed. One entry described a patrol at dusk where he saw lanterns bobbing through the trees. He followed them, thinking it was a lost group of hikers. But the closer he drew, the more he realized the light wasn't fire. It was eyes. Dozens of pale, glowing eyes, swaying in rhythm, retreating into the dark as he chased them. I'd seen those lights too years earlier. I told myself then they were fireflies. But fireflies don't move like they're being carried. Fireflies don't stare back at you. The ranger wrote, "They move as one body, but they have no legs. Follow them and you'll walk forever." I closed the logbook, heart hammering, and stepped outside for air. The forest around my cabin was calm, ordinary even. Yet when I glanced into the trees, I thought I saw faint glimmers weaving between the trunks, vanishing when I blinked. That was the first night I admitted it. My life no longer belonged to me. It belonged to whatever the logbook was guiding me toward. The next day, I tried something reckless. I burned one page. I tore it out with shaking hands, struck a match, and held the paper over the flame. It curled, blackened, shriveled into ash. Relief surged through me, foolish and desperate. Maybe that was all it took. But that night, when I opened the book again, the page was back. Whole. The handwriting darker, as though rewritten by a heavier hand. And there was a new sentence at the bottom that hadn't been there before. "Now you're writing with me." I snapped the book shut, but I could still feel it pressing into me, pushing thoughts into my skull that weren't mine. I imagined the roots from that dream tangling inside my head, growing through my eyes and out my mouth, making me their vessel. The ranger before me had ended his entries with something close to madness. The words tumbled across the page, half sentences, frantic notes. The cave isn't a place, it's a mouth. The pillar isn't a stone, it's a tooth. The cabin isn't shelter, it's an invitation. And beneath that, scratched deep into the paper, so hard it nearly tore through, "Don't let them teach you your own name." I shut the book and locked it in my trunk. I told myself I wouldn't open it again. But when I woke the next morning, the trunk was open, the logbook lay on my chest, and the page it had turned to was blank, waiting for me to write. I stared at the blank page until the morning sun rose over the ridge and bled through my cabin window. The logbook rested on my chest like a weight, as though my heart itself was trying to beat against it. Every fiber of me resisted the urge, but my hands still twitched toward the pen on my desk. I told myself not to. That writing would make me complicit, would seal whatever pact this thing had been waiting decades to complete. Yet when I tried to move the book away, my fingers went numb. I couldn't lift it. My own body betrayed me. And in the silence of the cabin, I swear I heard the faint scratch of a pen, though none touched the page. Finally, I broke. My hand moved without my consent, gripping the pen as though guided. The first words that appeared on the paper weren't even mine. They were letters carved by something else, yet through my hand. "Do you remember the boy?" My chest seized. My pulse stuttered. Yes, I remembered the boy in the creek, his dry boots, his calm voice. But the book hadn't asked as a question. It asked as if reminding me of a debt. I dropped the pen and slammed the book shut, panting. My breath misted in the air, though the day had grown warm. I fled outside into the forest where the normal sounds of morning, woodpeckers tapping, squirrels chattering, wind threading through branches, felt alien in their innocence. But the book had me. I knew I'd open it again. That night, I dreamed of Hollowmouth Cave. I was standing at its lip, the darkness breathing in and out as though the mountain itself had lungs. Roots hung down like teeth, and from within came not one voice, but hundreds, layered atop each other in a whispering chorus. Each spoke my name in a different tone, childlike, elderly, my own voice echoing back at me. When I woke, the logbook was already open on the table, the pen beside it. My hand shook as I picked it up because part of me wanted to see what it had written without me. But the page was still blank, waiting. I pressed the tip of the pen to the paper, and before I knew it, I was writing. I wrote about the woman in red at Devil's Needle, the boy in the creek, the cabin with the knocking beneath the table, the spiral fire, the footsteps in the snow. Each detail flowed out of me like it had been memorized long before I lived it. My handwriting filled the page, and still the words came. When I finished, the logbook vibrated faintly, like something purring. The ink shimmered as though wet, though it had already dried. And when I turned the page, I found something that wasn't mine. A sketch. Charcoal strokes pressed deep into the paper. It showed the mouth of a cave, but not as I remembered it. The stone lips curled into a grin, and from its depths stretched a hand, skeletal and long-fingered, reaching toward the surface. Beneath it, scrawled, "This is where you end." I slammed the book shut and shoved it into the trunk again. But this time, I locked the trunk, wrapped it in chains, and dragged it outside to bury it beneath a cairn of stones. I told myself I would not be like the ranger before me, consumed until his handwriting dissolved into madness. But the forest doesn't let go. For 3 nights I woke to the same sound, rocks shifting outside my cabin as though something was prying at the cairn. On the 4th morning, the trunk was back on my porch, the chains unwrapped, the book resting neatly on top, open to a fresh blank page. That broke something in me. I no longer believed in escape. The forest, the logbook, whatever tied them together, it had chosen me the way it had chosen him. So I wrote again. This time I confessed things I'd never said aloud. I wrote about the search missions that failed, the hikers we never found, the children whose parents we had to tell were sorry. I wrote about the nights I doubted myself, the times I should have listened to my instincts but didn't. And as I wrote, I realized I wasn't alone in those words. My pen's strokes doubled, as though another hand traced them, shadowing my movements. When I finished, I flipped the page. Another sketch waited for me. This one showed me. My own face, drawn in cruel detail, the eyes hollow sockets. Behind me loomed the forest, but its trees were bent inward, forming the shape of ribs. And beneath me, lines curved downward, forming a spiral. At the bottom of the spiral, hollow mouth cave. I dropped the book, bile rising in my throat, because I remembered what the old ranger had written. The cave isn't a place, it's a mouth. That night, the silence came again, not the peaceful kind, the swallowing kind. The forest muted itself. Every cricket, every branch, every gust cut away, and then the whisper rose closer than ever before, curling into the cabin itself. It said my name, slowly, sweetly, like a promise. I pressed my palms over my ears, but the sound was inside me now. My teeth ached with it, my bones vibrating like tuning forks. And then came the knock. Not from under the table this time, from beneath my bed. 3 sharp raps that shook the frame. I leapt up, lantern in hand, heart battering my ribs. I crouched and shone the light beneath the bed. Nothing. Only floorboards. But when I straightened, the logbook was waiting on the blankets, open to a page I hadn't written yet. Across it was a message in that same jagged hand that haunted the margins of earlier entries. It's time to come home. I didn't sleep after that. I sat with my back against the door, shotgun across my lap, lantern hissing low. I told myself the dawn would break this madness, that the sun always makes shadows smaller. But when the first light seeped through the cracks of my cabin, it revealed the truth. Boot prints, bare, wet, and many, leading from the forest straight to my door, and in the center of the prints, where no one should have been able to stand, was a pile of roots, fresh, damp, still twitching. I stared at the pile of roots until my legs gave way beneath me. They glistened with moisture, pulsing faintly, like veins torn from the earth but still alive. The longer I looked, the more certain I became that they weren't twitching at random. They were forming letters. At first it was just a curl, then a cross, then the shape of my name spelled out in twisting knots. My stomach clenched so hard I nearly vomited. I stumbled back, slammed the cabin door shut, and dropped the bar across it, though I knew no wood would keep this out. When I turned around, the logbook was already on the table, open to a new page. And at the top, written in ink darker than any I owned, was a sentence that made my blood run cold. You've seen the doors. Now you must choose one. My hand shook as I flipped back through the pages, trying to understand. The cave, the pillar, the cabin by the lake, they weren't separate. They were choices, different doors to the same place. And now the book was telling me I couldn't linger in the threshold any longer. I refused. I told myself I'd burn it all down, cabin, logbook, everything. But when I grabbed the lantern, the flame sputtered and died, leaving me in choking darkness. The forest outside went silent again, as if waiting for me to decide. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in my chair, shotgun across my knees, staring at the logbook while its blank page seemed to breathe in and out. At dawn, I packed. My compass, my knife, my sidearm. I slung the shotgun across my back, and though I told myself it was my decision, I knew the truth. The book had already chosen for me. Hollowmouth Cave. It pulled me there like a magnet. My boots carried me over ridges and through valleys without hesitation, as though the forest itself had cleared a path. Birds scattered from my presence, and the wind seemed to hush when I passed. By the time I reached the lip of the cave, my throat was raw from breathing too hard, though I hadn't broken a sweat. The cave gaped wide, dark and wet, roots dangling like teeth. I shone my flashlight inside, but the beam only traveled a few feet before dissolving into blackness. A low hum vibrated up from the stone, not sound exactly, more like the suggestion of sound, a pressure behind the ears. And then, faintly, I heard it, the logbook turning pages, though it was buried deep in my pack. I stepped inside. The air was damp and thick, clinging to my skin. My boots echoed too loudly, each step overlapping itself as though recorded and replayed. The roots swayed above me, dripping water that smelled like rust and mold. The deeper I went, the clearer the whispers became. At first, they only breathed my name, but then they shifted, threading into sentences. "You've come back. We've been waiting. Write it down." My flashlight beam wavered across the walls. Symbols were scratched into the stone, spirals and jagged lines like a child's crude drawings. But when I blinked, they changed, twisting into letters, then words. Some were in the ranger's handwriting. Some were in mine. The cave didn't just echo sound, it echoed memory. Every step forward pulled more from me. I smelled smoke from the spiral fire. I heard the faint knock under the cabin table. I saw the woman in red smiling as she stepped into shadow. I wanted to turn back, but my legs didn't listen. They carried me deeper, where the floor sloped downward in a slick spiral. My flashlight flickered, then died. And yet I could see. The walls glowed faintly, not with light, but with faces. Hundreds of them, stretched and pale, mouths half open. Their eyes tracked me as I passed, lids twitching like they hadn't blinked in years. Roots pulsed from their temples, vanishing into the stone above. The whispering grew louder. One face detached itself from the wall, lips moving. It was the boy from the creek. His voice was steady, calm, the same as when he'd said, "They said you'd come." Now he added, "You never left." My chest convulsed. I stumbled forward, desperate to escape those eyes, but the deeper I went, the more familiar the faces became. Lost hikers I'd searched for, campers reported missing, and then faces I should not have seen, faces of people still alive as if their images had been stolen before their bodies. And then I saw my own. My knees buckled. There I was, pressed into the stone, eyes hollow, mouth open in a silent scream. Roots grew from my temples, down my cheeks into my chest. And beneath the face was carved one word, soon. I staggered back, trembling. My pack slid from my shoulders, the logbook tumbled free, landing open on the slick stone. Pages flipped on their own, faster and faster until they stopped on a blank sheet. My pen rolled out beside it, clinking against rock. My breath hitched. My hands shook as the whispers sharpened into a command. Write it down. I wanted to resist, to scream, to shatter the book into pieces. But I crouched instead, pen between my fingers as though it belonged there all along. And I began to write. Not of my choosing. The words spilled out in handwriting that was mine, but not. I wrote of doors and mouths, of roots feeding on names, of silence that wasn't absence but hunger. I wrote of the ranger before me and the ranger before him and the unbroken chain that stretched back further than memory. And then the pen paused. My hand trembled, and the words formed one last command across the page. Finish the log. I dropped the pen. My heart thundered so hard I thought my chest would split. The cave roared with whispers, rising into a scream, a storm of voices not in unison but layered, tangled, choking me with their demand. I fled. I don't remember climbing out of the cave. I only remember the sudden burst of daylight, the forest spinning around me, my lungs dragging in air like I hadn't breathed for hours. My pack was gone, the logbook with it. But when I looked down at my hands, ink stained my skin, words etched into my flesh like I had written directly on myself. And in the distance, from the black mouth of the cave, I heard 3 sharp knocks. When I stumbled back to my cabin, the world seemed thinner, stretched like canvas ready to tear. The trees didn't sway with the wind anymore. They leaned in, listening. The ground under my boots felt softer, as if I were stepping on veins instead of roots. I bolted the cabin door, shut every window, but the silence followed me inside. I lit the lantern, but its flame burned low, sickly, as if starving for oxygen. My hands were stained with ink I couldn't wash away. I scrubbed until the skin broke, but the words remained, etched like tattoos, fragments of the logbook sentences. Don't let them teach you your own name. It knows you now. Finish the log. I collapsed at the table, head in my hands, when I heard the unmistakable thud of paper. The logbook was back, sitting on the wood before me, clean as though it had never been buried or drowned in cave dark. Its cover gleamed faintly, and it was open, not blank, not half-written, but filled. Hundreds of pages, all in my handwriting. My breath locked in my throat. I turned a page, then another, then another. Each told the stories I had lived, the cave, the boy, the woman in red, the cabin, the spiral fire. But it went further. It described things I hadn't yet done, hadn't yet seen. One page showed me rising from this table, stepping into the night, following a trail of bare footprints to the ridge. Another showed me kneeling beside Hollowmouth Cave, pressing the logbook onto the stone, surrendering it. And then a page that made my blood run cold. A description of me, much older, sitting in an abandoned ranger station decades from now, scrawling the very first entries. The logbook wasn't passed down. It wasn't inherited. It was recursive. It fed itself through time, looping rangers into its orbit, rewriting them until the past and future collapsed into one continuous hand. I slammed the cover shut, tears burning in my eyes. My pulse rattled like a trapped bird. If what I read was true, then I was never going to escape this. Not by fire, not by chains, not by denial. A knock sounded at the door. 3 sharp raps, exactly like under the cabin table, exactly like in the cave. My breath caught. The shotgun lay across my lap, but it felt like a toy in my hands. Another knock. Then a voice, low and patient, threading through the wood. "You've left something unfinished." I wanted to scream. Instead, I stood, trembling, and unbarred the door. The forest yawned open before me, moonlight dripping between the pines. No figure stood there. Only the trail of footprints, bare, wet, glistening, leading into the dark. The logbook rested heavy in my grip. Then my chest burned as if my lungs were too small to hold the air. I stepped outside. The night swallowed me whole. The forest was not empty. Shapes moved between the trunks, not animals, not men. Shadows with weight, glimmers of eyes that blinked in rhythm, faces pressed against the bark like masks waiting for bodies. They whispered as I passed, not in menace, but in hunger. At the ridge, the trail curved down toward Hollowmouth Cave. The footprints grew darker, wetter, until I realized they weren't wet with water. They gleamed red. The cave loomed below, wider now, roots dangling in thick cords, the air humming with the pressure of 1,000 held breaths. The logbook grew hot in my hands. I knew what it wanted. I knew what it meant by finish the log. It didn't want stories of the forest. It wanted mine. My end. My submission. The book wasn't a record. It was an appetite. I dropped to my knees, tears streaming, and pressed the logbook against the stone lip of the cave. It pulsed under my palms, pages fluttering as if feeding on the night air. The whispers rose into a chorus, voices layering into one command. Write it down. I pulled the pen from my pocket. My hands moved without my will, scrawling across the page. My own voice whispered the words as they formed. My name is... I stopped. The pen hovered. My throat constricted. That was the trap. To write my name was to surrender it, to give myself wholly to the log, to let it root through me until I was no longer a man, but a vessel. The cave roared with fury. The roots shuddered, dripping black water. The air pressed so tight I couldn't breathe. The voices screamed my name, each in a different pitch, shaking the stone walls. I hurled the pen into the darkness and slammed the book shut. Silence. For one impossible second, everything stilled. The cave, the trees, the night itself held its breath. Then, the ground beneath me shuddered, the stone groaning like the stomach of something vast and hungry. A crack split along the cave's lip, and from it rose a stench of rot and earth. The roots writhed, reaching toward me, scraping across the ground. I ran. Branches clawed at my face. Roots snared my ankles. The forest twisted, spiraling back toward the cave no matter which way I turned. My chest heaved, lungs burning, until I finally broke free onto the service road, collapsing against the hood of my truck. The logbook was gone. My hands were empty, but the ink still burned across my skin, words etched deeper than flesh. I drove all night, farther and farther from those mountains, until the trees thinned into plains. And still, every few miles, I heard it, 3 sharp knocks beneath the rumble of the engine. I've left the Ranger Service now. I keep no uniform, no maps. I don't go near forests. But the truth is, none of that matters, because the forest is not outside anymore. It's inside me. Some nights when I try to sleep, I hear the whisper through the walls, patient and soft. You never finish the log. And in my dreams, I'm always back at that table, lantern burning low, pen in hand, staring at a blank page that will one day tell this story exactly as I've just told you. Because that's what the logbook wants. It doesn't want an ending. It wants a beginning that never stops. I'd always felt a deep bond with the wilderness, a profound connection with nature that made the cityscapes, concrete jungles feel suffocating. When I received my acceptance letter as a park ranger at the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, I was ecstatic. Here was an opportunity to truly make a difference while being enveloped by nature's majesty. My name is Sam Thompson, and my journey into the wild, unknowable heart of the Smokies began on a brisk summer morning. The day was clear, the sky vast and cloudless, its expanse rivaled only by the sprawling sea of green peaks and valleys that stretched into the horizon, a silent promise of adventure. Perhaps a hint of danger, but ultimately an irresistible call to the unknown. The ranger station was an unassuming structure nestled in the crook of 2 towering hills, a comforting oasis of human architecture amidst the wild expanse. As I stepped inside, I was met by the rich aroma of brewed coffee and a symphony of radios crackling with static. It was here I met the team, a diverse bunch united by a shared respect for nature's wild beauty and the steely resolve to protect it. Mike, a grizzled veteran ranger with laughter lines etched deep into his face, extended a warm, firm handshake. Lara, a spirited ecologist with an infectious passion for the park's biodiversity, welcomed me with an encouraging smile. There were others, of course, each with their unique quirks and stories, but all sharing an unspoken bond, an appreciation for the immense responsibility we held as custodians of the park. In the late afternoon, after the station's bustle had eased, I decided to take a solitary walk. The towering trees cast long shadows, the sun beginning its descent behind the hills. A rustle caught my attention, a flash of russet brown between the trees. A deer, it seemed, but as it raised its head to look at me, something was off. Its eyes held an eerie intelligence that made a chill creep up my spine. Then the deer made a noise, a sound so surreal that I was frozen in my tracks. It was a whisper, eerily similar to a human voice. The words were incoherent, but the tone was unmistakable. It was a call for help. I blinked, and the deer was gone, leaving only the echo of its uncanny cry. I shook my head, convincing myself that the exhaustion from the day had played tricks on my mind. Little did I know that this was just a prelude, a first taste of the eerie symphony that the Smoky Mountains had in store. My tenure as a park ranger had officially begun, and with it, the veil was about to be lifted, revealing the true nature of the park. The wilderness I thought I knew was about to challenge my very understanding of reality, and there was no turning back. My second day at the park dawned bright and early. I awoke to the symphony of bird song and the aroma of dew-soaked leaves. The allure of the Great Smoky Mountains had not dulled with the setting sun, it had merely transformed, offering a different face under the morning light. At the ranger station, the day started with an informal briefing. Mike outlined our duties, peppering his monologue with anecdotes and advice. Each story carried a subtle lesson about the unpredictability of the wilderness. It was humbling to realize that, despite our modern tools and technology, we were still at the mercy of nature's whims. As the day progressed, I got to know my fellow rangers better. Their stories varied, yet a common theme echoed throughout, an awe-inspiring respect for the park and its unexplained mysteries. Their eyes twinkled with a mix of fear and fascination when they shared tales of unusual animal behavior, uncharted trails that led nowhere, and hikers who had gotten lost, only to reappear inexplicably miles away from their last known locations. In the fading light of the afternoon, I found myself drawn to the trail where I had encountered the strange deer. I followed the familiar path, the trees whispering untold stories in the wind. The forest seemed different in daylight, less menacing, but still holding on to its secrets with a quiet dignity. As I walked, I could almost hear the echo of that eerie whisper that had sent chills down my spine the previous evening. The deer, with its intelligent eyes, the human-like cry it had made, it all seemed impossible in the stark daylight. I told myself it was just a product of my imagination, fueled by the anxiety and excitement of my new position. I spent the rest of the day patrolling, getting to know the winding trails, the hidden brooks, and the tranquil meadows of the park. The beauty of the Smokies was breathtaking. A tranquil oasis of green, punctuated by the vibrant colors of wildflowers and the constant background music of the forest. Returning to the ranger station, I found myself equally awestruck and apprehensive. The Great Smoky Mountains were indeed beautiful, an untouched piece of heaven on earth. But underneath its verdant beauty was an undercurrent of something else, something that lurked in the shadows and mimicked human voices. As I settled in for the night, I couldn't shake off the haunting image of the strange deer. I decided to share my experience with the other rangers the next day. My curiosity piqued. Unbeknownst to me, this decision would set off a chain of events that would lead me into the deepest mysteries of the park, a journey that would transform my understanding of the world and my place in it. The next morning dawned with the chirping of birds and a gentle breeze that rustled the leaves. As I walked into the main area of the station, I felt a knot of anticipation in my stomach. Would sharing my experience with the deer make me sound unhinged? Would my colleagues think less of me, or worse, question my competence? After our regular morning briefing, I decided to bite the bullet. I described my encounter, choosing my words carefully, trying to make it sound less like a creepy campfire story and more like a fascinating anomaly. To my surprise, there was no laughter, no ribbing. Instead, there were nods of understanding, even a few knowing smiles. Mike, his face serious but not unkind, began to share stories of his own. He spoke of strange happenings, eerie sounds in the night, and shadows that seemed to move on their own. His stories weren't told in a tone of fear, but rather a kind of resignation, a concession to the fact that there were things in the park they couldn't explain, things that defied rationality. Lara chimed in too, adding her own experiences. She described instances where she'd felt an uncanny presence, or when her usually reliable compass would spin erratically for no discernible reason. Her scientific mind struggled with these anomalies, but she'd come to accept that the park held mysteries perhaps beyond our comprehension. These revelations, rather than alleviating my unease, intensified it. The realization that such strange phenomena were accepted as part of the job was hard to digest. How did one make peace with the idea of sharing space with the inexplicable? The uncanny? Yet there was a strange comfort in knowing my experience wasn't an isolated incident. It was as if a veil had lifted, revealing a world that existed parallel to ours, intertwining with our reality in the most unexpected ways. It was daunting, but at the same time, undeniably fascinating. As I lay in bed that night, the forest's usual serenade of cricket chirps and rustling leaves seemed to carry a different note. Each echo was a whisper of untold stories, each shadow a concealed mystery. I wondered about the strange deer, its eerie mimicry, and what it could possibly signify. The unease was still there, a dull thrum in the back of my mind. Yet alongside it, a newfound resolve was beginning to take shape. I was here for a reason, and I would do my best to uncover the truth behind these mysteries, to ensure for the sake of the park's visitors, and perhaps come to terms with the uncanny in my own way. After all, I was a park ranger. I was here to protect and understand the wilderness in all its beauty and terror, and this was just the beginning. As days turned into weeks, my life at the Smokies settled into a pattern. Each day brought new challenges, and with them, an ever-deepening respect for the wilderness. But along with the quiet satisfaction of fulfilling my duties came the persistent undercurrent of unease. One day, while digging through old reports in the station's cramped archive room, I stumbled upon a thick folder labeled Missing Persons. Out of curiosity, I leafed through the files, each one detailing disturbingly similar cases of park visitors who had vanished without a trace. Names, ages, last known locations, speculated paths, all meticulously recorded, but with no conclusive explanations or outcomes. As the number of files grew, so did my concern. It wasn't unusual for inexperienced hikers to lose their way, but the frequency of these incidents and the fact that many happened in well-charted areas was unsettling. I brought this up with Mike later that evening. He glanced at me, his expression grave, and sighed. Yes, he knew about them. The disappearances had been a troubling part of the park's history for as long as he could remember. They were the whispers that echoed through the trees, the chill that hung in the air long after a search party returned empty-handed. But it's not just the disappearances, Mike added, his voice barely above a whisper. Sometimes they come back, disoriented, with no memory of their lost time, as if they walked through a veil into another world and then slipped back in after hours. His words sent shivers down my spine. I thought of the strange deer, the oddities we'd all experienced, the feeling of an unseen presence. Was there a connection? That night, as I lay in bed, I found sleep elusive. The wilderness outside, once a comforting presence, now seemed to hide untold dangers. Yet amidst the fear, a sense of determination welled up within me. I was here not just as a bystander, but as a protector, a guardian. If there was a threat, it was my duty to understand and counter it. However, the Smokies had their own rhythm and secrets. Their majestic peaks and lush forests were a testament to nature's untamed beauty. But within their shadows lurked mysteries that were as unnerving as they were captivating. How did one seek answers in a world that defied understanding? As the moon bathed the park in its silvery glow, I decided to make it my mission to unravel these mysteries, to find the link between the strange occurrences, the vanishing visitors, and the park's unknown entity, to find the missing pieces of this enigma and fit them together. I was a park ranger. I was here to protect, to serve, and to understand. No matter how deep the shadows, how eerie the whispers, or how uncanny the phenomena, I would face them head on. After all, as the saying goes, not all those who wander are lost. Some of us are just seeking answers. 2 weeks into my journey as a park ranger, I found myself navigating the sprawling expanse of the Smokies with growing confidence. My initial unease had given way to a quiet resolve. I was here to unravel the park's mysteries, and I had begun to see every anomaly, every unexplained incident as a clue. One day we received news that a seasoned hiker named George had not returned from his usual trail. A knot of apprehension formed in my stomach. I had met George on a few occasions, a cheerful man with a ready smile and well acquainted with the park's trails. Something was wrong. We quickly formed a search party. Mike, Lara, a few others, and I packed our gear and set off toward George's usual trail. As we delved deeper into the wilderness, I couldn't shake off the sense of being watched. It was an intangible feeling, a shiver that ran down my spine every so often as we followed the trail George was known to frequent. Our reliable tools began to falter. My GPS, usually accurate to the meter, spun aimlessly, its needle dancing in erratic circles. Our radios, our lifelines back to the station, filled with static, reducing our communications to indecipherable gibberish. Panic fluttered in my chest, but I pushed it down. We needed to stay calm, focused. Yet even as I put on a brave face, I couldn't ignore the distinct sensation of time slipping away from us, as though we'd crossed an invisible threshold into an alternate realm. Hours seemed to blend into each other, the afternoon sun hanging in the sky like a frozen celestial body. Our search yielded no results, just a deepening sense of unease. Eventually, we decided to return, our hearts heavy with the grim possibility of George's fate. The journey back was equally disorienting. Our faulty devices continued to play tricks, and the forest seemed to shift around us, familiar landmarks appearing out of place. When we finally stumbled upon the ranger station, it felt like surfacing from a deep dive, gasping for breath. That night, as I lay in bed, I replayed the day's events over and over in my head. The eerie stillness of the forest, the faulty devices, the inexplicable stretch of time. It was as if the Smokies themselves were keeping us away from something, guiding us off a path we were not meant to tread. My encounter with the strange deer, the tales of unexplained phenomena, the disappearances, and now George, a pattern was emerging, a chilling narrative of a hidden presence in the park. It was elusive, powerful, and seemingly capable of bending reality to its will. As fear battled with fascination within me, I was beginning to realize the magnitude of my mission. This was not just about solving a mystery. It was about understanding a force that existed outside the realm of our comprehension. And somewhere in the midst of this tangled enigma, I felt a personal stake. I was a part of this narrative, and I was determined to see it through, for George, for the park, and for myself. The days following George's disappearance were a blur. The park, usually a bustling hub of activity, fell into a subdued silence. His absence echoed louder than the whispers in the trees, louder than the haunting call of the strange deer. We were united in our silent vigil, waiting for George to reemerge from the forest's embrace. 3 days later, just as the last vestiges of hope were beginning to flicker out, George reappeared. He was found by a group of early morning hikers, dazed and disoriented, standing at the edge of a well-trodden path he should have easily recognized. We were overjoyed, relieved, but also deeply perplexed. George had no recollection of his lost time. He remembered setting off on his hike, the sun warming his face as he took the familiar trail. His next memory was of waking up to the concerned faces of the hikers who found him. We listened with rapt attention as he narrated his fragmented experience. His confusion, his fear, mirrored our own. And amidst his disjointed memories, he recalled one peculiar detail, a deer, a seemingly ordinary deer that had looked at him with a strange intensity, its call echoing in his mind even though he couldn't quite remember the sound. The room fell into a profound silence as he shared this detail. It was a chilling confirmation of our fears. The uncanny link we'd suspected. The strange deer was not just an anomaly. It was an integral part of the park's mysteries, a key to the unsettling phenomena that were becoming increasingly hard to ignore. George's return only strengthened my resolve to uncover the truth. The park and its secrets were more than just unexplained anomalies. They were now an active threat to the people we had sworn to protect. And while the fear was still there, it was now overshadowed by a firm resolve, a determination to confront the unexplainable. In the days that followed, I immersed myself in the mission. I meticulously documented every detail of George's case, cross-referencing his experience with past incidents, creating a detailed map of occurrences in an attempt to find a pattern. The park had become my life. The mountains, the trees, the rivers, they were not just landscapes anymore. They were pieces of a complex puzzle waiting to be deciphered. The whispers in the wind, the fleeting shadows, the uncanny sense of being watched. I was now attuned to them all, each strange occurrence a signpost on this extraordinary journey. As I looked out into the verdant expanse bathed in the ethereal glow of the setting sun, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Yes, there was fear, but also an overwhelming fascination, a relentless curiosity that propelled me forward. And although I was in uncharted territory, I was no longer a passive observer. I was an explorer seeking answers in a wilderness that straddled the fine line between the known and the unknown. I was a park ranger. I was a guardian of the Smokies, and I would not back down until I unearthed the truth behind its enigmatic mysteries. Weeks turned into months. My initial wonder at the beauty of the Smokies had evolved into a profound respect for the mysteries they harbored. The strange occurrences, the disorienting time loss, the vanishing visitors, these anomalies had become a part of my everyday life. But instead of unsettling me, they now fueled my determination to get to the bottom of this. Late one evening, after a long day of routine checks and patrols, I settled down in the ranger station with a map of the park, reports of previous disappearances, and George's testimony. I began to plot each strange event, every missing person, every anomalous sighting. A pattern started to emerge. There was a clustering of incidents around certain areas, specific trails, dense forest sections, remote campsites, the same spots that were frequented by the uncanny deer. Could there be a direct correlation? As I sat back and surveyed the map, a thought struck me. What if this creature wasn't just a witness to these events, but somehow the cause? An unsettling possibility, but the frequency and consistency of its appearance could not be overlooked. Fueled by this newfound realization, I began to delve deeper into the park's lore. Late-night discussions with Mike and Laura gave me insights into native legends, stories passed down through generations that hinted at a voice mimic, a creature capable of imitating any sound any voice it heard. This eerily resonated with our experiences. The deer, its human-like cry, the mimicry. Could this creature from the lore and our experiences be one and the same? However, the more I discovered, the more questions I had. How did it lure people? Why couldn't they remember their experiences? Was it guarding something, keeping us away from certain areas of the park? As the lines between folklore and reality blurred, I grappled with the implications. The Smokies were not just a park. They were a realm that housed an entity beyond our understanding, an entity that could influence our reality. And it was my mission to understand this, to navigate the delicate balance between fear and fascination, the known and the unknown. Night after night, I pored over the map, studying the patterns, cross-referencing legends with incidents. Each clue, each piece of the puzzle, was bringing me closer to the truth. I felt like a detective on the trail of a mystery that was as intriguing as it was terrifying. Yet I was not alone in this quest. I had my fellow rangers, brave individuals who shared my commitment to safeguarding the park and its visitors. Our resolve was a beacon that shone through the murkiness of uncertainty, guiding us as we traversed this challenging path. And while the journey was daunting, I found myself fueled by an indomitable spirit of adventure. As a park ranger, I was entrusted with the protection of the Smokies and its secrets. But I was also an explorer, venturing into the realm of the unknown, seeking to unravel the mysteries that the park cradled in its bosom. It was a mission I was determined to fulfill. With every passing day, my connection to the Smokies deepened. My senses had grown acutely attuned to its rhythms, its subtle nuances. The park was no longer just a workplace. It had become my world. Each whispering tree, chattering brook, and rustling undergrowth was part of a grand symphony that played out its enigmatic melody in the heart of the wilderness. One night, as I was winding down after a particularly challenging day, an unsettling sound echoed through the dense silence of the forest. It was a cry, disturbingly human, yet uncannily animalistic. A chilling mimicry that froze the blood in my veins. Instantly alert, I grabbed my flashlight and radio and followed the sound into the enveloping darkness. The usually comforting forest now felt alien and foreboding, each twisted shadow appearing more menacing than the last. But I pressed on, drawn toward the cry like a moth to a flame. As I ventured deeper, a shape emerged from the undergrowth, the strange deer. Its eyes gleamed with an almost sentient intelligence. It was eerily still, its gaze fixed on me with an intensity that was almost palpable. I stood my ground, heart pounding in my chest as we held a silent standoff. The creature then issued the same human-like cry, a wailing call that echoed off the trees and sent a shiver down my spine. Just then, the radio crackled to life, Mike's voice filtering through the static, asking about my location. I relayed my coordinates, my voice steadier than I felt. As the radio crackled out, I turned back to the deer. But it was gone, vanished, as if it had never been there. I spent the rest of the night patrolling the area, my mind buzzing with questions. Was the deer calling out to me? Was it trying to communicate, or was it another instance of it luring in the unwary? As dawn broke, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, I returned to the ranger station, exhausted, yet restless. The encounter with the strange deer was a clear indication that I was getting closer to unraveling the mystery of the park. The incident only served to strengthen my resolve, my research, my interactions with the creature, the patterns I had observed. They were all leading me to an inescapable truth. The Smokies were home to an entity that existed beyond our comprehension, an entity that could influence our reality. While this truth was intimidating, it also fueled my curiosity. As a park ranger, I had taken an oath to protect this place and its secrets. This was my mission, my purpose. And no matter how uncanny the phenomena or how daunting the path, I was determined to see it through to the end. After all, I was not just a park ranger, I was an explorer and a seeker of truths in a world that straddled the known and the unknown. And as the sun rose, casting a golden glow over the park, I found myself eager to continue my journey into the heart of the Smokies and its mysteries. In the wake of my chilling encounter with the strange deer, I sought wisdom from the only source that seemed to grasp the gravity of the enigma, the Native American elders. Their tales of the voice mimic, which I had initially dismissed as folklore, were aligning too closely with my own experiences. It was time to listen with an open mind. As I sat in the circle of elders, their wizened faces lined with wisdom and resilience, I felt a profound sense of respect. They spoke of an ancient spirit that dwelled in the park, a spirit capable of imitating any sound, any voice it heard. It was seen as a guardian, a gatekeeper of the Smokies' deepest secrets. The elders described its form as that of a deer, a familiar creature in the park. It had the power to influence time, leading those it chose into a realm where minutes could stretch into hours, where reality as we knew it was distorted. As they spoke, their words resonated with the truth of my experiences. The lost hikers, the strange deer, the distortion of time. It was becoming clear that the entity and the phenomena were one and the same. Yet the elders didn't view the entity as malicious. They believed it was protecting something, preserving the balance between the park and the outside world. Those who went missing were not victims, but chosen ones, individuals who were led to the realm and then returned with no memory of their experience. Listening to the elders, I felt a mix of emotions: fear, fascination, and a strange sense of relief. I wasn't losing my mind. The events weren't mere anomalies. There was an explanation, as fantastic as it seemed. As I left the gathering, I looked out toward the Great Smoky Mountains, their peaks bathed in the glow of the setting sun. They seemed serene, unassuming, yet I knew they were teeming with secrets that had survived centuries, secrets that I was just beginning to understand. The knowledge I gained from the elders fueled my resolve. I would do my utmost to respect and protect the balance the entity was guarding. The park wasn't just a tourist attraction or even a wildlife haven. It was the dwelling of an ancient spirit, a being beyond human comprehension. As a park ranger, my mission was evolving. I was no longer just a guardian of the park. I was a liaison between two worlds, the known and the unknown. It was a daunting responsibility, but one I was ready to shoulder. That night, as I lay in my bed at the ranger station, the whispers of the forest seemed less ominous, more familiar. I wasn't a stranger in the Smokies anymore. I was part of its intricate web, its ancient lore, its extraordinary reality. And I was ready to fulfill my role, ready to protect its mysteries while striving to comprehend them. As summer turned to fall, I found myself more immersed in the park than ever before. Each rustling leaf, each whispering wind seemed to carry a hidden message, a secret waiting to be discovered. My meetings with the elders had given me a deeper understanding, but there were still countless questions that lingered in my mind. One evening, while on patrol, I came across a part of the park that felt eerily familiar. It was the same spot where I had encountered the strange deer, the area where the veil between our world and the entities seemed thinnest. A shiver ran down my spine as a chilling sense of déjà vu washed over me. I felt watched, observed by unseen eyes. I turned around to see the strange deer standing at the edge of the clearing, its gaze focused on me. But this time there was no fear, only a profound sense of recognition. I could not communicate it, but I felt an understanding pass between us. It knew. I knew. That night, as I made my way back to the ranger station, I felt a peculiar shift in the atmosphere. It was as if the forest had accepted me, recognized me, not as an intruder, but as a part of its enigmatic existence. Days turned into weeks, and my experiences in the park continued to evolve. There were times when I would lose track of hours, only to find myself back at the ranger station, my memories of the elapsed time hazy and fragmented. I'd find unexplainable notes in my handwriting, maps with trails marked that I didn't remember plotting, and occasionally a strange human-like cry echoing in my mind. As unnerving as these instances were, they also filled me with a strange sense of peace. I was being drawn into the entity's realm, experiencing the reality it existed in. The park and I had become inseparable, two entities coexisting in a delicate balance, each trying to understand the other. My conversations with Mike and Lara became more about sharing experiences and less about seeking explanations. We had all accepted the existence of the unknown in our midst. And while we were still park rangers, committed to our duty, we had also become explorers, navigators, charting a course through an unexplored reality. As fall gave way to winter, the park took on a surreal beauty. The snow-capped peaks shimmered in the moonlight, and the barren trees stood like silent sentinels, witnesses to the extraordinary reality that unfolded beneath their skeletal branches. And amidst this ethereal landscape I stood, a guardian of the known and an explorer of the unknown, ready to embrace whatever the Smokies had in store. For I knew now, more than ever, that being a park ranger here was not just a duty, but a calling, one that I was ready to answer. Winter had settled over the Smokies, casting a blanket of quiet tranquility. The park was less crowded now, the biting cold a deterrent for most hikers. But there were those who braved the chill, drawn to the ethereal beauty of the snow-clad wilderness. One such brave soul was a young woman named Jenna. An experienced hiker, she was a familiar face in the park, but one frosty morning she did not return from her trek as expected. Mike brought the news to the station, his usually calm demeanor replaced with palpable worry. We knew we had to act fast. Equipped with flashlights, radios, and an annoying sense of déjà vu, we ventured into the cold wilderness. The eerie stillness of the forest was punctuated only by the crunch of our boots on the snow and the crisp winter wind rustling through the barren trees. Our search led us to the areas where the strange occurrences were most frequent, areas where reality seemed thin and mutable. But the woods gave away no secrets. The radios crackled, GPS signals flickered, and time seemed to warp around us. Hours turned into days, and still there was no trace of Jenna. Our search grew more frantic, our resolve tinged with desperation. But then on the third day, something inexplicable happened. We found Jenna in a remote clearing, confused but unharmed. She had no memory of the last 3 days, no recollection of what had transpired. It was as if she had been plucked from reality and then returned, her mind wiped clean of the experience. As we escorted her back to the safety of the ranger station, I couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. We were navigating a reality that defied logic, a reality that was as fantastical as it was disconcerting. But despite the challenges, we were making a difference, ensuring that people like Jenna returned safely from the realm of the unknown. That night, as I sat in the ranger station reflecting on the day's events, I realized how far we had come. We had started as park rangers, guardians of the wilderness. Now we were also guardians of an extraordinary secret, protectors of a delicate balance between two worlds. As the moon shone down on the tranquil expanse of the park, I couldn't help but feel a sense of contentment. This was my world, a world of towering peaks and whispering winds, a world of lost hikers and enigmatic entities, a world that balanced on the fine line between reality and folklore. And despite its challenges, despite its enigmas, it was a world I was proud to be a part of. For I was not just a park ranger. I was a keeper of secrets, a navigator of the unknown, and a guardian of the extraordinary balance that defined the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. As spring breathed life back to the Smokies, I found myself reflecting on my journey. It had been a year since I first arrived, a year filled with extraordinary revelations and incredible experiences. I had come to be a park ranger, a guardian of the wilderness, but had become so much more. From my first encounter with the strange deer to the tales of the elders, every experience had led me closer to the heart of the park, its ancient spirit. I had been chosen, just like Jenna and the others, to walk the line between two worlds, to protect and understand the extraordinary balance of the park. As I stood on the porch of the ranger station, gazing out at the vast expanse of wilderness, I felt a profound sense of belonging. The park was more than just a workplace, it was home. And I, in my role as a ranger, was more than just a guardian. I was a part of the park, its lore and its reality. The strange deer, the voice mimic, it was a constant presence, a reminder of the extraordinary entity that dwelled in the park. Its calls no longer filled me with fear, but with understanding, a reminder of the delicate balance we shared. Mike, Laura, and I continued our roles, guardians navigating the extraordinary. We shared our experiences, growing closer as we unraveled the mysteries of the Smokies. We were not just colleagues, but comrades, chosen to witness and protect the extraordinary. The hikers who wandered off returned, their memories blank slates, but their spirits untouched. The park continued its rhythm, the wilderness alive with the harmony of the known and the unknown. The elders, too, remained a source of wisdom and guidance. Their stories, once folklore to me, had become my reality, a testament to the extraordinary coexistence we were a part of. As I looked back at the past year, I realized how much I had grown, how much I had learned. Being a park ranger in the Smokies had challenged me, pushed my understanding of reality, but it had also rewarded me with experiences and insights beyond my wildest imagination. As I watched the sunrise paint the sky with hues of pink and orange, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. I was a park ranger, yes, but also an explorer, a guardian of secrets, a navigator of the unknown. I was an integral part of the extraordinary reality that was the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. As the new day dawned, I walked back into the ranger station, ready to start another day in my extraordinary world. For I knew that every new day in the Smokies would bring a new experience, a new insight into the extraordinary balance I was chosen to protect. The park and I, we were in this together, ready to embrace the mysteries, the challenges, and the marvels that lay ahead. After all, we were more than just rangers in a national park. We were guardians of the extraordinary, protectors of a reality that was as mystifying as it was marvelous, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I've been a cop in this small town for about 15 years now. It's a quiet place, tucked between rolling hills and dense woods. The kind of town where everyone knows everyone, where people leave their doors unlocked at night and where nothing ever seems to happen. At least that's what most folks think. But I've seen things that no one talks about, things that don't make sense. Most of the time, I just keep my mouth shut. People around here don't like hearing about what's really lurking in the dark, and I can't blame them. But some nights, like tonight, I feel like I need to get it off my chest. It all started about 5 years ago. I was working the night shift, patrolling the outskirts of town. It was one of those cold, misty nights where the fog clings to the ground, making everything look like a ghost town. I was driving down an old back road when I saw it, a figure darting across the road in the beam of my headlights. I slammed on the brakes, heart pounding, but by the time I skidded to a stop, the thing was gone. I say thing because it wasn't a person. It was too fast, too low to the ground. At first, I thought maybe it was a deer or a coyote, but the way it moved wasn't right. It was unnatural. I got out of the car, shining my flashlight into the trees, but all I could see was the fog swallowing the light. That night, I chalked it up to my imagination. Maybe I was tired. Maybe I'd just seen a shadow, I told myself. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been out there, something watching me from the trees. A few weeks later, a call came in from one of the farms on the edge of town. A couple of cows had been killed, mauled actually. The farmer said it looked like a bear attack, but there haven't been bears in this part of Kentucky for as long as I've been alive. When I got to the scene, I almost threw up. The cows were ripped apart like something had torn into them with claws the size of butcher knives. I've seen animal attacks before, but this was different. There were no tracks, no signs of anything that could have done that kind of damage. We filed the report as a wild animal attack and told the farmer to keep his livestock locked up at night, but something about it didn't sit right with me. Over the next few months, more reports started coming in. Livestock disappearing, pets going missing, strange sounds in the woods at night. People were on edge, but no one wanted to admit that something was wrong. This town is built on denial, on pretending everything's fine, even when it isn't. Then one night, I got a call from Old Man Jenkins. Now, Jenkins is a bit of a town legend, a recluse who lives way out in the woods, never really bothering anyone. He doesn't call for help unless he absolutely has to. So when I got the call, I knew something serious had gone down. I drove out to his place, my gut churning the whole way. The road leading up to his cabin was overgrown, barely more than a dirt path. And by the time I got there, the fog was so thick I could barely see. Jenkins was waiting for me on his porch, shotgun in hand, pale as a ghost. "It's out there," he whispered as I got out of the car. "It's been watching me." I tried to get more out of him, but he wouldn't say much, just that something had been stalking his cabin for the past few nights. He'd seen it out of the corner of his eye, darting between the trees, circling his place, waiting. He didn't know what it was, but he knew it wasn't any animal he'd ever seen. We stayed out there for a couple of hours, watching the tree line. Every now and then I'd hear something, a branch snapping, the rustle of leaves, but I didn't see anything. Just as I was about to tell Jenkins we should call it a night, I saw it. It was fast, just a blur of movement at the edge of the woods, but it was enough to make my blood run cold. I couldn't make out much, but it was tall, taller than any human, with long, spindly limbs and eyes that glowed in the darkness. Jenkins fired off a shot, but whatever it was didn't even flinch. It just disappeared into the fog, leaving us standing there, hearts pounding, breath catching in our throats. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of the light, but deep down, I knew better. I didn't sleep that night. Neither did Jenkins. The sightings kept happening after that, more frequent, more intense. People started whispering about the creatures in the woods, but no one wanted to admit it was real. Not out loud, anyway. One night, I was driving home from another late shift when I saw something in the middle of the road. It was standing there, tall and thin, with those same glowing eyes. I slammed on the brakes, my heart hammering in my chest, and for a moment it just stared at me, like it was trying to decide whether or not to come closer. And then, in the blink of an eye, it vanished into the woods. I've tried to explain it away, believe me, but I can't. There's something out here in these hills, something that doesn't belong. People go missing sometimes, and we always blame it on accidents or wild animals. But I know the truth. I've seen them. So if you ever find yourself in the backwoods of Kentucky, something, do yourself a favor. Stay inside after dark. Don't go wandering off into the trees. And if you hear something rustling in the woods, don't go looking for it, because out here, there are things in the dark, and they're watching. They're always watching. About a year ago, I moved my family and me to a home way out in the woods in Tennessee. I wanted to be brief here, but I need to get this off my chest. And after looking into this matter a little more, I have a lot more details that I think will paint a clear picture in the end. So please bear with me. The nights here can be extremely loud. Between the crickets, the tree frogs, and the cicadas, it can almost be deafening. One night, not too long after we moved in, I had forgotten something in my car and headed outside to get it. The first thing that struck me as odd was that my dog wouldn't go outside with me. My dog goes everywhere with me, as I am her whole world. But not this night. As I held the door open, she looked out, then looked up at me like, nope. So I walked out and shut the door behind me. The second thing that caught me off guard was that there wasn't a peep. It was dead silent. Still, I shrugged this off and walked down my front steps and headed to my car. When I had gotten about 10 feet from my car, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I felt as though something was watching me. I looked around but saw nothing. After I reached into my car for what I had forgotten earlier, I had this feeling like something was moving toward me. I took a step back and checked around me. All of a sudden, I heard one of my hedges next to me, ones that line the walkway to our front door, rattle. At first, I thought it was a rabbit that I had spooked, as I had seen one just earlier in the day right where this was. A few seconds later, I heard the sound of a large rock, about the size of a cantaloupe, landing a few feet away from me. It hit the walkway and bounced into a shrub. I drew my gun, called out, and said, "Whoever this is about to be shot." After a few seconds of nothing, I began to think that maybe it was some local teenagers messing with the new people. I holstered my sidearm, turned, and started walking back to my front door. Almost as soon as I turned toward my house, I heard this deep panting sound. It sounded like a huge dog. But what made me nope back to my front door was that it sounded like it was right behind me. I leapt up onto my porch, turned, and drew my gun again, expecting something right there. But again, there was nothing. A couple of weeks later, I was on my porch at night, sitting on a bench with my wife. She got up and walked inside to get something. And as soon as she shut the door, I heard that panting sound again. I couldn't see anything, yet it sounded like it was right on top of me. The sound was coming from everywhere, and it was very loud. Again, I couldn't see anything, so I noped it back inside the house. At this point, I was questioning moving here, but after nothing else really happened, I let it go. A month or so later, it was a really rainy and stormy night. It was around 9 p.m., and my wife and I enjoy listening to the rain and talking about how relaxing it is. Me, growing up in Oregon, I loved the rain. And for the past 10 years, we lived in Vegas, where it would dump the entire year's worth of rain in one day, then be bone dry for the rest of the year. For my wife, who grew up in Nevada, rain was a rare thing. She loved going outside and watching it. So for us, this was an enjoyable experience. Except this night, in particular, things took a weird turn. As we were sitting there talking about the rain and relaxing, my wife stopped me and said, "Did you hear that?" I said, "No." "What did you hear?" She said, "I swear it sounded like a small child calling for help out in the woods beside our house." I said, "No, I didn't hear anything." After a few moments of us listening intently, she said, "There it is again." I said, "I didn't hear a thing, sweetie. Are you sure you're not just hearing things?" She looked at me, offended that I didn't hear it, and said, "No, I am positive." How could you not hear that? It was our son. I think he's out there and got lost. I said, no, he's in the house sleeping on the couch. We then both looked through the blinds that were open right behind us, and we could see all of our children laying there. She said, that's so weird. I swear it sounds like our son. I said, well, it isn't him. He's right there. Besides, I don't hear anything. She then stood up and said, wow, he's really crying out for help. I need to go look for him. Now, at this point, if you knew my wife, you'd know she is absolutely creeped out by the woods and wouldn't be caught dead walking into them during daylight, much less at night during a storm. I grabbed her hand and said, I've been listening intently, and there is absolutely nobody calling out for help. You need to stay here. At this point, I was getting worried about her. She was acting completely out of character. Not to mention, she was 8 months pregnant with our baby daughter. She then said, what if there is some child out there lost in the woods? I said, well, first off, I would be able to hear them too. Secondly, there are no other kids around here for miles, and the odds of them being lost 100 feet from our house, which is lit up like a Christmas tree, is nil. She said, I know, but what if it's a kid? Before I could say anything else, she stood up and started walking toward the stairs. I jumped up and grabbed her hand again and said, no, you're not. Get in the house. I didn't know what was going on, but I told her she needed to go inside. She complied, and we both went inside. I didn't know what this was, but it freaked me out. A few months after this, just as it was getting dark outside, I heard the front door to our house open, and I got up to investigate. We have autistic 6-year-old twins, and we have the door set up so they can't open it without us there. So to hear this sound, it could only be my wife. What was weird was the fact that she usually doesn't go outside without saying something to me. I walked out front and saw my wife walking down our private road toward the drive on the side of our house. I asked her what she was doing, and she said she was sitting on the back patio and kept hearing a baby crying out in the woods. I said, seriously? And you just decided to walk off into the woods to investigate? She looked out into the woods and said, see, there it is again. Again, I couldn't hear anything. But what I did notice was that it was completely silent again. I told her, just like before, the chances of a baby being out in the woods outside our house is slim. You need to get back in the house. She said, what if someone left a baby out there? I said, well, if that were true, I would hear it too. Now, at this point, I was really starting to worry about my wife's mental health. I actually asked her to see a psychiatrist, and she did. Now, looking back, I feel really bad about this, knowing what I know. A key to this moment was that my wife had just given birth to a baby girl a month before. A few days after this, we were out front on the porch. It was early evening, and I had just mowed the lawn that day. Our 3-year-old son was riding around on his little car in front of the house. Now, he knows he is not allowed outside of a certain area that we mapped off. He loves playing outside, but with the road about 50 feet behind our front porch, we have to be careful, as a lot of boaters will fly through after drinking all day on the water. As we were talking, we were both keeping an eye on him. A neighbor drove by and stopped to say hi for a second. The interaction took maybe 8 seconds, as all they said was, how are things? We said, good, and he told us he'd stop by later as his wife got something for the kids, who happens to be one of their teachers. We said, okay, great, and he drove off. I looked over to where our son had been, and he was gone. I called out his name and ran over to the side of the house and could hear his car on our side drive. I scolded him for leaving the area, and he said something in his 3-year-old gibberish and pointed to the woods behind our house. I told him he had 5 seconds to get back up to the front of the house or else, but he adamantly pointed back in the direction of the woods and kept trying to tell me something. I looked off in that direction and just assumed he saw a deer or a squirrel or something and wanted to see it up close. I walked him back up to the front of the house, and he cried the whole way there. He got really upset that I wouldn't let him go into the woods, but I just wrote this off as him being curious. Most 3-year-old boys are. Now, this instance isn't isolated, as our twins have done similar things, but nothing quite as extreme as this. There have been nights where we had just laid down and heard a loud bang on the side of our house, on the wall behind our bed. It was so loud that I jumped up and looked out the window. Our floodlight had come on, but I could see nothing. Now, the weird part about this is that our bedroom sits about 12 feet above ground level, as we have a full-size cinder block basement. I put on my slippers, grabbed one of my 12-gauge shotguns, and walked outside to investigate. It was dead silent again. The floodlight on the side of the house had clicked off at this point, so I walked over to the end of the deck and shined my light around the yard. Nothing. I walked around the house, shining the light intently. As I approached the backside of the house, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. It felt like someone was watching me. I shined the light up into the trees, but again, nothing. I rounded the corner, and the first thing I noticed was that my 3 dogs, who were in their area, weren't making a peep. Now, our dogs have no filter. They bark at everyone, including me. So to see them all hiding, tails between their legs and dead silent, really had me worried. As I kept walking, all of a sudden the crickets and frogs started making sounds again. It was as if someone had flipped a switch. I walked back inside and told my wife that I hadn't seen anything. She shrugged and said, "Okay, as long as the dogs are okay." Due to the circumstances that night, I decided to let the dogs in to sleep with us. This very same thing has happened on all 4 exterior walls of our house. It's random and annoying, but just like this instance, every time there is nothing outside. There have also been times when we were sitting in the house, and while I was watching a movie, my wife walked over and asked, "Did you call me?" I said no. She swore she had heard me call her name right in her ear. She said it was definitely my voice, but I was about 20 feet away in my recliner. The important part, she was sitting at the table doing something, and the slider to the backyard was open behind her. Our back patio sits about 20 feet off the ground like a balcony with no stairs. I think the previous owner built it for barbecuing. There have been several instances where she said she heard whisper in her ear, but she couldn't make out what it said. I kept thinking she was going crazy. But as you'll see, I think all of this ties into this final moment where things are revealed. The last thing I want to mention before we get into what just happened is that I have a shooting range built behind my workshop on the opposite side of our property near the main road. It's kind of on a downslope, but it works perfectly for what I need. And the range is cut straight into the woods, going down about 100 yards. When you're downrange, you're surrounded by woods on all sides, except back up to my shop. I have to say, it always feels creepy when I'm dealing with my targets or mowing. When you're down there, it feels like you're miles from anyone. One day, around 5 p.m., I was sighting in a new rifle scope. The sun was still up, but fading. I knew this would be my last test. Until then, nothing had really happened during my trips downrange, other than this constant feeling of uneasiness. As I got downrange, I kept getting this overwhelming feeling like someone or something was watching me. I looked around but didn't see anything. As I was placing stickers over my previous shots, I heard something big off to the side. It sounded like a large branch snapping. Now, if you've been in the Tennessee woods, you know branches fall off trees all the time. But this one sounded fresh, like strong, live wood. If that makes sense, I turned and looked. Nothing. I started walking back up to my rifle, and I swear I heard someone right behind me. I turned around. Again, nothing. As I started walking again, I heard a deep growl. It was really deep and loud. Worse yet, it felt like it was all around me. I turned to face the range and started walking backward. The thought of a wild dog charging me freaked me out, so running didn't seem like a good idea. I slowly backed up the hill to my rifle. Nothing happened. I grabbed my rifle and sprayed the target with rapid fire, hoping to scare off whatever was stalking me. I left 10 rounds in the mag, grabbed my rifle bag, and quickly walked back to the house. I never told my wife. I didn't want her to freak out. Fast forward about a year. My niece was staying with us as a live-in nanny during summer break from college. We were coming back from the store and about a mile from the house when I saw two eyes reflecting in the headlights from a wide tree on the side of the road. It caught my attention. They were higher than a deer's, but a different color and size. Just as I said, "What is that?" and squinted, they vanished. I commented that it was almost like it knew I could see it and moved. The color was golden or green, and it moved like a large cat, ominous, hard to explain. I shrugged it off as we passed the tree and saw nothing. A few minutes later, we arrived home. As we were getting bags out of the car, my 3-year-old son came running out to greet me. As I waited to help carry bags, I heard my dog growl. I looked in the direction she was focused, my neighbor's property across the street. Now what I saw has kept me up at night. Up until this point, I was skeptical. Even after what happened the year before, I still thought maybe it was just my imagination. My street is in a spread-out neighborhood. Each house sits on several acres, and at the end of the road is Kentucky Lake. My neighbor's house is adjacent to mine on about an acre. Directly in front of us is a wall of woods, and behind us is thousands of acres of untouched forest. As I looked across to my neighbors, I saw a large, dark figure between the trees. It moved quickly on all fours, then stood up and walked like a man. It was tall, but what was strange was the distance it was covering. When it passed in front of the shed, I swear I could see through it. It was clearly walking quickly, but faster than any human sprint, and more importantly, no sound. It was like it phased in and out of reality as it moved. I said, "What the hell is that?" and realized it was looking at us. It had moved at an angle to minimize its exposure and was moving fast and silently. The hairs on my neck stood up. Whatever it was stalking us. I told my niece to get inside. I grabbed my son and ran in. I came back out with my AR-15 and a short scope. My niece was still out grabbing stuff from the car. I was annoyed. I told her clearly to go inside, but I said nothing and just watched. She turned toward the woods and suddenly bolted to the house, panicked. I asked what she saw, her face pale. She said, "I heard something big walking in the woods," and then a deep, guttural growl. I asked why she didn't come when I told her. She said she thought I was talking to my son. I told her what I had seen. She wanted to go get a closer look. I told her not to, but she went anyway. As she walked down the walkway, I heard leaves crunching in the woods. I told her to stop and take the flashlight. She was about 6 feet from the SUV. As she turned and walked back, I saw something gray and hairy bolt from behind the SUV and across the street into the woods. Our SUV is about 6.5 feet tall. Whatever it was, it cleared about 45 feet in what looked like a single leap. It moved like lightning. Whatever it was, it wanted my niece. It had been hiding behind the car, out of sight, waiting. She still doubted me and walked back with the flashlight. As she entered the driveway, she stopped, leaned forward like she saw something. I asked what it was. She ran back onto the porch, repeating, "Nope, nope, nope." She said there was a figure hiding inside a tree, and she saw its eyes. I asked what they looked like. She said at first they were dull red, but as she got closer, they looked dead. I asked, "What do you mean dead?" She said the pupils looked gray, like blind eyes, almost like a dark cloud. She wanted to go out again and took a step down, but as she did, it revealed itself from the tree. I said, "Get inside," and locked the door. It looked like a tall, human-shaped being. It was really tall and ominous as hell. The next morning, we compared its height to the tree limb. It was around 9 feet tall. The eyes were about 6 inches apart. At this point, I don't know what this thing was. After researching, I think it might have been a glimmerman or a crawler. I checked for sightings in Benton County, but found nothing. More importantly, it seemed to phase in and out like a shadow person, but bigger, more obvious. I originally posted this on r/Bigfoot, but after more research, I believe it belongs here. One thing that makes this fit is that it can communicate telepathically. This explains why everyone was hearing things no one else could. It also mimics playback communication. So when I heard a dog panting, it was probably one of my dogs that had heard. My wife was actually hearing our son crying for help, as he had recently fallen and cried for help. The baby crying would be our newborn baby, who she had given birth to recently. And it must have heard me call my wife's name and kept telepathically calling my wife's name with my voice. Another thing that my niece had said that night was that she felt compelled to go back outside to it. She said she felt like this thing was communicating with her somehow, and it wanted her to go back outside. The more I read about this thing, the more everything that's been happening over this past year makes sense. One thing that I find extra convincing is that down the road towards the lake, there is a property that is barbed wired off and is a wall of forest with no driveway. A lot of the property down our road is undeveloped, owned land. And on one of the trees, there is this large old sign that says "Screamer lives here," with an arrow pointing back into the woods. Now, I have to admit, when I first saw this sign, I laughed, thinking maybe the owner screamed at trespassers who entered his property and teenagers put up the sign to mess with him. But when I did a satellite search of our neighborhood, that entire section of road has no houses or trails or anything and is just pure forest as far as the eye can see. One of the things that this thing is said to do is make a loud scream when threatened. Now that you understand my story, I doubt this is the ending. The next question is, what can we do? I don't want my wife or kids to disappear one day. And if there is more than one of these things out there, this really makes the missing 4 lemon make a whole lot of sense. I feel perplexed and scared as what can I do? Any advice? I will try and keep this post alive with any new experiences. I have reason to believe a rancher in the northwest of my state might have come under a Wendigo attack. I'm on the trail of the case as a paranormal investigator, and I realized I know very little about Wendigos, besides having seen 2 outside my home a few years back. 40 cows were killed, but not consumed, with bites consistent with that of a large canine. I'm almost 80% sure it was a skinwalker rather than a Wendigo, but a friend of mine asked if there's any chance it could be a Wendigo, so I wanted to give it the right amount of thought before discarding the theory. Since Wendigos are characterized by all-consuming hunger, I'm inclined to say it wasn't one. I'm truly convinced it was a skinwalker, but I figured I'd gather a second opinion or 3. Also, if there's anything I'm missing, let me know. Any other possible options? I live in the Western USA, and I've already ruled out Sasquatches. I don't have enough information to confirm the existence of genuine lycanthropes, but that would be a solid guess if I could be sure they were real. This was about 23 years ago, and I had no clue what a dogman was, and I didn't believe in anything supernatural back then. I was hunting wild hogs in one of the southernmost areas of the Great Dismal Swamp. This is far south of the wildlife refuge where it ends at the Albemarle Sound in eastern North Carolina. I had put my boat in the water at a friend's house, about a half hour by water from where I went into the swamp. This was in late November, so it was pretty cold and really overcast, and it gets dark around 5 or so. It was about noon when I tied up and got out of the boat. The first hour or so was pretty uneventful. I was working my way inland. Some of this part of the swamp can be walked through when the tide is low, and it's just marshy with deeper canals and bogs scattered about. But there aren't any trails or marked paths or anything, so you really have to pay attention to where you're going and definitely need a compass since you can't see the sun. It's pretty dark in there, even on bright and sunny days. I was back in there about 2 hours looking for signs of hogs. I could tell some had been back there at some point, but it had been a while. I got a little further in and started smelling what I had thought was a boar. It's breeding season, and male wild hogs have a very distinct smell. It's musky and kind of fermented, mixed with old poop and urine. Kind of hard to explain if you've never smelled it before. However, this was different. It was musky, but more like an outside dog that's soaking wet. I stopped to look and listen, and after 10 or so minutes, I started hearing a snuffling breathing that came and went. After a bit, I started to hear some growling. I started to get a little freaked out because it didn't sound like a hog and it sounded big. I stopped again and knelt down, waiting and looking around. Where I was at, the brush was pretty thick, so I really couldn't see more than 20 or so feet in any direction. That's when I started seeing movement. It definitely wasn't moving like a hog. It was kind of low, walking, crouched down, but not on all fours, and I was only getting glimpses of it, and it would stop. It was probably about 40 feet away. This is when I actually started getting scared. I was born in northeastern Kentucky and spent most of my free time as a kid in the woods, camping, riding dirt bikes, and have always been comfortable even in the deep woods. So when I moved to NC, I fell in love with the swamp. This is the first time I think I had ever felt real, actual fear. I had a Mossberg 590 shotgun, but no extra shells and no pistol. The 590 also has a bayonet lug, so I took out the bayonet and put it on. I started backing up, not taking my eyes off where I had last seen whatever it was. A few minutes later, I hear it again, a little further over to my left. I'm probably about 3/4 of a mile into the swamp. It doesn't seem very far, but the terrain doesn't make for really quick movement. This goes on for about another 20 minutes while backtracking out as fast as I can, and I'm still hearing it and catching glimpses of movement, and the smell is getting stronger. After a bit, I realize that this thing has gotten between me and the way I came in from my boat, and I'm starting to panic. I try to start getting further away from it and headed in the right direction. And then I see it again, and it's standing up, and it's pretty damn tall. It was still back in the brush, so I couldn't really make out any details, as it's dark as hell back there. I wanted to cry and run, but I knew that was a bad idea. It didn't seem like it wanted to get in the water, so I started wading through the canal, headed back towards my boat. I started to put some distance between it and myself. So I got back on hard ground to move a little faster. But I can still hear it snuffling and growling and moving through the brush, but it's not close anymore. I made it back to my boat, and I'm soaking wet and freezing. But I thank God I made it out of there, and just in time as it's getting foggy and starting to drizzle. I had never been that scared in my life. I made it back to my buddy's house and told him what happened, and I can tell he knows something when I tell him where I went. He brings me in and gives me some hot coffee with a big slug of bourbon in it. When I calm down, he takes me to the other house out back of his property to where his granddad lives. I had met his granddad before, but he had always been kind of standoffish to me. I found out later he just had real bad PTSD from Korea, and he, my buddy, and his family had lived in that area since after the Civil War. I think his granddad's great-granddad had been a slave around there, but that's a story for another day. I guess what I mean to say is his family had history in that area and knew the place a lot better than me. After I told his granddad what happened, he stood up, looked me in the eye, and said, "Don't go back in there. You're lucky you made it out. That's where the big dogs live." I left and went home and slept for about 18 hours. I tried to forget about that experience and started to believe I was just seeing things and freaked myself out. I eventually forgot all about it until a few years ago when a Dogman Encounters video came up in my YouTube feed. I was curious what the hell a Dogman was, so I started listening to it, and that whole experience came flooding back to mind. It was very similar to what happened to me. I started looking into it, and there have been other sightings and encounters in eastern North Carolina. So that's my story. I'm 44 now and still live in coastal North Carolina, but haven't been back anywhere close to that area. I still hunt and love the outdoors in the swamp, but don't go too far in anymore. I live right next to a Navajo reservation and have made friends with many of the people there. My age, we like to hang out, play video games, and just be normal teenagers. I walk over there a lot since my best friend lives just a little less than a mile away from me. This isn't a long trek and usually only takes me about 25 to 30 minutes. I have made this trip dozens of times now and have grown very comfortable with it. I know the people along the way, so I'm not scared or on edge at all. However, there is a patch of forest about midway there that's a little unnerving. Sometimes there is always that feeling of being watched. This was a regular occurrence for me, so I tried to just ignore it and shake it off as my mind was playing tricks on me. This day, I spent more time at my friend's house than I meant to, and when I left, it was already getting dark. I reached the stretch of forest right as the sun disappeared from the sky. I shivered a little as I readied myself to begin the journey. I was 10 steps in when I heard a branch snap. You know the sound, the one that screams that there is definitely someone or something there with you. I froze, not sure of what I should do next. Should I run? Should I turn around and book it back to my friend's house? I didn't know the best option in this situation, so I whispered, "Hello," hearing my voice crack as the words fell from my lips. I don't know why I even opened my mouth, but it was out there, so I listened for any reply. My heart sank when the answer came back and the sound of my own voice echoed, "Hello." I started to breathe too fast, my heart pounding against my chest. I felt like I might faint. "Hello," my voice came again, but not from my mouth. I wanted to run, but my feet felt cemented to the ground. I couldn't scream, I couldn't reply, as my voice echoed over and over from only a short distance away. I couldn't pinpoint exactly where it was coming from. It sounded like it was everywhere around me. "Hello," it repeated. "Stop it." I finally managed to tear from my lips. Everything went silent for a long minute. Nothing happened. The air only grew stale, and I realized for the first time there were no typical forest sounds. No bugs, no frogs or crickets, nothing. I stood there, terrified, waiting to see what could happen next. "Stop it," it mimicked back. I'd had enough and was willing for my heavy legs to move. Before I could take a step, I heard rustling in the bushes only 20 feet to my left. I watched in horror as a deer head with huge antlers protruded from the bush, and as it came further out and stood upon two legs, I took off. I flew out of those woods and all the way home in record time. I said nothing to my mom when I got there. I just went up to my room, laid down, and thought about what happened. My mother came in at some point and asked me if everything was all right. I replied, yes, that I was just tired. I don't know why I didn't tell her. I guess I might have just been afraid of how she would react. I called my friend and told him everything. He freaked out and told me that no matter what happened that night, to reply or look out my window. This terrified me even more. He said to call the next morning and he would explain more, that he had to speak to his grandfather as soon as possible. That night I didn't sleep. I stayed awake listening to every little sound the night brought. Around 3 a.m., just as I was about to drift off, I noticed the air changed. The night sounds quieted, and I felt my heart begin to pound. I lay there and waited, pulling the covers up over my head like a child far too scared to move. It came after a long moment. "Hello," I cried. It was all I could do. "Hello, stop it!" It mocked what I had said in the woods again. It was terrifying enough when it copied what I said, but then it did something new. It called my name, Amy, in my mother's voice. "Amy, Amy, come here! Hello, stop it!" My voice again. For the rest of the night, the creature outside my window called my name in my mother's voice and repeated what I said in the woods over and over. In the morning, when the sun broke through the dark, it finally stopped. I fell into a fitful sleep. I woke around noon to my friend calling to tell me that he had spoken to his grandfather and could explain what had happened to me. He said there was a creature called a Yanella Ducci who goes on all fours. He explained that it was an evil entity that used dark magic to transform into an animal with the attributes it required. It had caught my scent and knew me. Now, I was also given a warning that since it knew me, it would always follow me, and I would always have to be careful. Last night, I heard scratching on my window, then a low hum. The creature began saying my name again, but also adding in things I hadn't said in my mother's voice. At one point, it started calling my name, but drawing it out, really. Like it tried to get me to come inside or open the door and let it in. This went on all night. At this point, I feel like I'm going crazy. I don't know what to do. Is it seriously going to stalk the shadows around me for the rest of my life? I don't think I can handle that. I live in Somerset County, Pennsylvania, on the mountain ridge, and was curious if there have been any reports of any type of activity here this past year. We live in a very rural area, and I've been in this home for 20 years. This past year, it just seems like some strange things have been happening. My teen daughter's bedroom window faces the road. Across the road is a wooded area and farmland, with lots of abandoned mines in this area. I'm sure the area across the road has been mined. My daughter, who is 17, has been complaining since probably the summer of 2023 about strange noises coming from the woods. One night, she woke me, and I heard them as well. The best explanation I could come up with was feral hogs. Even though we never saw what was making these noises and causing the trees to move, the noises were feral and terrifying. We have visits from coyotes, bobcats, fishers, bears, and all kinds of native wildlife, and we hear those types of sounds all the time. This was different. These were shaking. My daughter goes out very early for the bus when it's dark and has also claimed to see a deer that disappeared, reappeared, or shape-shifted to the point where she is afraid to wait for the bus. I saw a mountain lion on my property this past summer. I've decided that was just a normal mountain lion, despite the Game Commission's insistence that they don't live here. I know it sounds ridiculous, but things seem strange here lately. Something is just different. There is a creepy feeling I get when I'm outside at times, like I'm being watched, that I've never had before. I've also noticed much more air traffic overhead to the point that I installed an app on my phone to see what was flying over. I've seen more strange helicopters flying over where it used to be occasional. I usually brush it off as having something to do with the Flight 93 memorial. On Thursday night, January 18th, 2023, around 6:50 p.m., a helicopter went over so low that it shook my house. I was busy, so it took a couple of minutes of this continuing before I checked the app and noticed it was a Black Hawk helicopter out of Latrobe. It was across the road over the area where my daughter had been complaining of the noises coming from the woods. It hovered over the area for a good 10 minutes in one spot, then disappeared from the radar altogether. I tried to see it from my upstairs window, but couldn't see much. My husband, who initially thought I was paranoid, also began to think it was strange. We saw lights in the woods over that way, but not much more. We could not see the helicopter in the air. The weather has been generally crappy here with high winds and blowing snow this week. I'm not sure if they landed or turned off the radar, but I'm guessing they may have landed because I could no longer hear the helicopter sounds. I've believed in the paranormal for a long time because I once saw a ghost in the 90s when I lived in Baltimore. I've never really thought much about cryptids or things that could be dangerous. Just wondering if you've heard anyone else reporting odd things in this area. It's not the Chestnut Ridge. I think it's the next ridge over that may run through Bedford and Somerset counties. Just curious if anyone else has said anything this way. This is an encounter my girlfriend and her friend had a few years ago, not mine personally. I've heard her tell this story a few times before, but after recently hearing them together describe what they saw, I thought that you'd find it interesting. Maybe someone has seen something similar. This encounter happened in Lakewood, New Jersey, a few years back. It was midday sometime in September. My girlfriend and her friend used to jog together regularly at local parks. The park they were at this particular day is called Lake Curzalgio, which butts up to a housing development. The trail they were on loops around the lake, and 3/4 of the trail is basically just a normal paved sidewalk that follows a road but eventually turns to dirt and goes through a small wooded area on the far side of the lake, the other quarter of the trail. Mind you, this place is far from being remote. It is New Jersey, after all. While jogging through the wooded part of the trail, they came upon a creepy, humanoid-looking figure on the edge of the trail that stopped them both in their tracks. They both kept referring to this thing as troll-like. It was short, maybe 4 feet tall at most. It was dressed in a long black hooded cloak, hunched over, sitting on a wooden chest. Yes, a wooden chest. Exactly the kind you'd imagine a troll to be sitting on. They said they could not see any face at all because its head was directed at the ground and the hood was too long. But what they did notice was the cloak was short enough to see part of its legs, which were wearing what looked like regular flesh-colored stockings and had very small, clubbed feet. Its legs had large, protruding boils or tumor-like lumps on the exposed area. It was wearing blue gloves, too. Terrified, they eventually made their way past this thing, coming only a few feet from it, hoping it wouldn't jump out at them. They got the hell out of there faster than they've ever run before. It didn't say anything or try to cause them any harm. It just sat there hunched over. They thought at first that maybe it was just a mannequin or something someone put there as a joke, but they noticed hand movement right before they passed it. Needless to say, they have never gone back to this lake ever again. Every time my girlfriend talks about this encounter, I can hear the fear in her trembling voice, and she was obviously somewhat traumatized by the encounter. Even though I geek out about these types of stories all the time, she has absolutely zero interest in any of these types of things. She will roll her eyes or shake her head and tell me I'm crazy or about a cool story of Bigfoot or aliens or whatever that I read about, trying to pique some interest in her in these types of subjects. However, she continues to want nothing of it. I'm a very open-minded person when it comes to this stuff. I can't say I believe in anything because I've never had a convincing encounter aside from hearing a few strange sounds in the woods I couldn't explain. I always ask myself, is it possible creatures, aliens, or Bigfoot exist? The answer is usually yes. But then again, someone just playing a prank to mess with people is extremely more logical sometimes, especially in a place like New Jersey. The Bigfoot I saw in Temecula, California in June 1985 was at night as I stopped on a dirt road. I couldn't drive any farther that night, and when I got out to do my business, I heard and saw it as I was finishing up. It did have an odor of something dead, like the decomposing body of a coyote. Anyway, it stood about 50 yards into a dry riverbed with trees about 45 feet in average height. I shined my flashlight in the direction of the smell and saw movement. But what may be different than most sightings is its eyes actually glowed bright blue and were about 11 feet tall. Judging by the tree height, its eyes were just above a limb that I measured at 11 feet. The next day, I had a .357 with me, but I had a feeling that it would not stop this creature if I were to shoot it in case it came for me. I left in a big hurry, and that Toyota truck just did not seem fast enough. That was the second time I had seen one. The first was back in March 1952 in the Sage area between Hammett, California and Temecula, California. I went back the next day and measured the tree limb to its footprints, which were about 20 inches long and maybe 9 inches wide. This was a huge creature. I had a .3557 I carried at all times with my own hot loads, a Colt Python with which I was very accurate, but it was so big I felt it would not stop if he or she came for me. Do or don't take my word. I know that 11 feet is big, but that is what I believe it to be by the footprints and the tree limb. One difference from other sightings, except for the dead and foul smell, is this one difference. Its eyes glowed a bright blue when a light was flashed in its eyes, and me being 70 yards away, which is fairly close. It is out there somewhere, most likely. This area is close to the Puma Indian Reservation, which goes down towards Mount Palmer Observatory, a whole lot of forestry type land. I was part of an alternative spring break trip at my university, and we were in a van, and it happened a few years ago. We went from Michigan to Utah and had a day off, and we all decided to hop on our two vans and go to Arizona for the Grand Canyon. Well, it was starting to get dark, and it was such a beautiful experience to see. But then, out of the corner of my eye, as I'm driving, I notice in one of those remote desert houses that two men were throwing what looked like human-sized bags into a ditch. To this day, I keep thinking they were bodies being thrown into a ditch and buried, or maybe stashing some drugs in the desert. They were too preoccupied to notice the vans and were a good distance from us to possibly notice, but I can't shake the feeling of dread. What would have happened if they saw us or even imagined what could have been in those bags? The lack of light pollution and being in the middle of nowhere, Afghanistan, is pretty great if you like looking at the night sky. Add the light amplification capabilities of night vision goggles to this, and you start seeing some really weird stuff. Probably mostly UAVs or manned jets with a couple of satellites, and the general glitchiness of night vision explains what I was seeing. But all the same, my grandfather was a World War II vet, and one of his war stories was about being hunkered down in a ditch with a bunch of other guys when a French woman came along and went from soldier to soldier, handing them apples. He looked away for a minute when she got to the last guy, but when he looked back, she was just gone with no obvious place she could have gone to, and no one else knew where she went either. Probably a perfectly reasonable explanation, but he seemed to think there was something supernatural going on. I was in the Marines. We were in Okinawa for a while the battalion I served with rotated one company to Okinawa for a few months on a cycle, and I was pulling a simple patrol with a couple of other guys. No big deal, just around the restricted areas near the base. One guy radios, there's this woman walking across the beach, and he can't get her to stop. Another guy comes from the opposite end to try and cut her off. I mean, we didn't want to shoot her or anything. Come on. And they're both approaching her, trying to get her attention, when at about 50 meters or so away from her, she turned to face the ocean and, according to them, just disappeared. They could be pranking us, but if so, they both must be damn good actors because they seem shaken as hell by it all. We were also told this is by no means the first time this has happened. I'm an environmental educator at a nature preserve, so I spend a lot of time outdoors in sometimes isolated areas. There's one area of the park I try not to take groups of kids anymore. Once in a while, we have to go through that trail since it's a shortcut to the kayak launch, and when it's 95 degrees Fahrenheit outside, you're ready for anything that'll make your trip shorter. When I started there, one of the first things I did was familiarize myself with all areas of the preserve. So I spent quite a bit of time hiking through all of the trails, even the rarely used ones, since I have to know my way around to navigate groups or go rescue someone if they get lost, which happens. One part of the preserve is an old homestead site of a now abandoned pineapple plantation. It was settled in the 1890s. We don't know much about the family beyond the name and the approximate year they settled there and the approximate year the homestead was abandoned. This is in southern Florida, and there are thousands of similarly abandoned homestead sites. The early settlers of that area had to be tough as nails. This was a pre-railroad area. The nearest town was about 5 miles south through what would have been wilderness with no real roads. So these guys were on their own in a land absolutely bursting with mosquitoes, panthers, bears, and bad water. The water table is high, and fresh water can be easily contaminated by the salt water nearby. In other words, early homesteaders were badasses because that was the only way they'd survive. There is a narrow trail through what was once the homestead site. On one of my first days, I decided to trek through there. I got about half a mile in when I started to get some weird vibes. I've always been sensitive to my surroundings and have spent enough time in isolated natural areas to know that if something doesn't feel right, it probably means your instincts are picking up on something you should pay attention to. Usually, this means your brain is picking up on minute movements on the ground that indicate an unfriendly snake may be nearby, or another animal you don't want to confront. While the panthers are nearly gone, we've got aggressive wild boars and bobcats that freely roam. So I stopped dead in my tracks and let my mind go quiet, looking around carefully for any warning signs. There weren't any, and I didn't see any recent tracks, but the bad vibe feeling was still there. I shrugged it off and kept going. The trail kept getting narrower, and the bad vibes kept growing deep in my gut. I felt I was being watched and followed. Now, this is an isolated area, so the possibility that a person was following me was remote but possible. I stopped every few meters, but there were no sounds, actually none at all, not even birds. I started to sweat, and my heart started to race. One thought kept echoing in my mind: you are not welcome here. You are not welcome here. Turn around. You are not welcome. Well, that, I thought, just jittery from nervous new job feeling. I came to a bend in the trail and I stopped. My feet would go no further. In my mind, the phrase got louder and louder: you are not welcome here. You are not welcome here. I heard a crash coming from behind me, but when I turned to investigate, there was no one. Not animal, not human, nothing. The vegetation was sparse enough I would have been able to see something. I turned around and left. I put it down to nerves or me being a wimp or something and sort of forgot about it. About a month later, I'm taking a camp group through to the kayak launch where our kayaks await us. I decided to take the kids through the narrow trail to save us about 10 minutes. We get to the same bend in the trail, and the kids have gone silent. These are 9-year-olds in summer camp. They are not silent. They're never silent. I look behind me to one kid who looks as though he's scared shitless. "I don't like it here," he said. "Why not?" I asked. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "I feel like we shouldn't be here." I couldn't turn around at that point, so we hustled to the kayak launch and all was well, but we were all a little on edge. I took another group through the trail a week later, and again, the kids were silent at that bend in the trail. For that whole summer, whenever I took the shortcut, kids get silent, and I'd get those bad vibes. I try not to go down that stretch of trail anymore if I can help it. Obviously, this is nothing more than a gut feeling on my end, but only a few other times in my life have I felt a gut feeling about a place that strongly. I don't know if it's the spirit of whatever homesteader was there or something else, and it's hard to describe, but it doesn't want people trespassing. As far as I know, it's never hurt anyone, but it seems to make everyone feel the same way. You're not welcome. Edit. I can go take some pictures of the bend in the trail if anyone really wants to see. My father was driving a truck, and at around 3 a.m. in California, he was on a dirt road between cornfields, going faster than he should have been probably, when all of a sudden, some woman appeared on the side of the lane and stood there. It was so last second that he couldn't react, and the right side mirror ended up hitting her in the head. He stopped, couldn't find her, called the police, and made a report. They never found her. Back in the summer of 1997, I had a terrifying experience with what I now know to be the phenomenon known as the black-eyed people. At the time, I had never heard of these beings and have been bothered by the experience for many years. It's only just occurred to me to scour the internet to see if anyone else has ever witnessed anything like it, as I knew that I couldn't possibly be the only one this has happened to. My encounter differs from any that I have now discovered so far, as they were not trying to communicate with me, but were rather trying to keep away from me. Believe me, I now know that that is a good thing. Also, it differs in the fact that my experience happened in broad daylight rather than late at night like the others I have read. It was a hot, sunny summer day in 1997. I was about 15 at the time and was out with my friends. I live in a small town called Grantham in Lincolnshire, UK. While out with my friends, I was not far from my home and decided to go home to grab a quick drink. My two friends accompanied me down to my house and waited outside while I went in to have a drink of water. I was quite thirsty, so quickly drank 2 pints of water and then went back outside. My friends had gone, so I decided I would walk back to my friend's house, which was around the other side of the block. As I walked up the path to the street, I happened to look about 5 houses down where my mom's friend lived. At the front of her garden, she had a wooden fence at the time and a driveway on the furthest side of the garden. There was also a wooden fence, and just behind it, there were 2 very large conifer trees that overhung the fence. So, looking down the street, I saw 2 people backed up to the fence, and the top of them was pushed back into the overhanging conifers. So I only saw the 2 pairs of legs. Thinking that these were my friends messing around with me, I started walking down towards them. As I got closer to them, I shouted out, "Come on, you 2. I can see you hiding there." Thinking that they would come out laughing, I smiled to myself. But instead of coming out, they managed to jump up into the conifers over the fence and come out in my mom's friend's garden. At this point, I was thinking how they could have done this because the foliage on the trees was pretty thick. They didn't stop there. They turned around towards the next garden and managed to climb over the 5 feet fence panel. As I watched them weirdly go over the panel, I shouted again to stop messing around. I said that it was weird the way they got over the fence because it wasn't a hop or a jump. I can only describe it as lizard-like. That's the only way that comes to my mind to describe it. So, I kept walking down the road and watched as they went over a 6 feet gate into the next door's back garden. So I thought to myself, I know what to do. I would carry on walking and catch them when they come out of the next garden. I picked up my pace, carried on, and caught sight of them in the next garden and stopped dead in my tracks as I looked in horror at what I'd been chasing. They stood a few feet away from each other. One looked like a teenager. He was wearing the fashion of the time, which was a blue puffer jacket that was zipped up. He was wearing jogging bottoms that had studs up the legs, which were called poppers, trainers, and a baseball cap. I didn't look at his face as the other one caught my attention nearly straight away. This one was much older, very pale skin. The top of his head was completely bald, but around the side of his head he had long, greasy black hair down to the middle of his back. He was wearing a long trench coat, which went down to his ankles. He was wearing boots. His hands had long fingers that ended with sharp-looking, dirty nails. He had a big hooked nose, and his eyes were pure black. It looked so evil. As my eyes met him, it felt like time stood still. Nothing was moving. Not a leaf, no breeze, nobody else in the street. Silence. I couldn't move as I was paralyzed with fear and terror. I knew it was staring at me into my eyes, maybe into my soul. I stood rooted to the spot for what felt like hours, but must have been maybe 5 minutes. I broke the eye contact, turned, and ran for what felt like my life back to my house. When I got indoors, I sat down and cried like a big baby. I couldn't console myself. It took me a while to compose myself and tell my parents what had happened. They didn't know what to do. I sat down and drew what I had seen. I still have the drawing today. Not that I need it. That image is well and truly etched into my mind, and I would probably draw the exact same one in another 30 years. I don't know what this thing is. It definitely was not human. Over the years, it has played on my mind, bringing many questions and no answers. I thought it was either an alien, a demon, or any monster in between. Some of the questions it's brought me, apart from what is it? How did they climb the fence like they did? Why were they wearing large coats on a boiling hot day after reading other accounts of them? Why were they out in the middle of the day on a normal street in a small town? Why did they run from me? I hope no one ever has the experience of encountering these black-eyed beings. If you see one, run for it. P.S. It turned out that my friends went straight back home when they left me. I was quite angry with them for a while and told them what had happened, only for them to laugh at me and think I was joking. I've never been more serious about anything. This is no laughing matter, and I dread to think what could have happened if I hadn't run off. Please be aware of them and take care of yourself. This was not hiking, but it was in a remote place in the woods. My uncle built a house on some acreage he has that is pretty far out there. There is not another house within 2 miles of his, at least, and most of that is woods and cow pastures. But his place is beautiful. He built it all by hand and has a wonderful wraparound deck, perfect for family get-togethers. We were all out there, probably 20 adults and 5 or 6 kids, for a party one day. It was one of those summer times when it is blazing hot, but the light breeze is cool enough that you don't notice it after a while. I had been there hanging out all day when I was asked to run into town and grab some more groceries. So I packed up and headed out. I got the groceries and everything was fine. As I drove back, it was starting to get dark, and it was at a time of year when night falls fast. It was pitch black when I finally arrived. As I pulled up, I noticed something sitting in front of my car, facing the house. It wasn't disturbed by my headlights, but it did glance back at me once. It was a panther, just chilling there watching the party. As I sat there for a second watching it, I noticed that it had specifically placed itself near the edge where all the kids were running around. After I had my headlights on it for a minute or so, it kind of looked back at me again, as if to say, okay, I was caught. Oh well. And then it gave the most human-like sigh and just walked off into the woods. I sat there for a bit before building myself up to get out of my car and go to the party to tell everyone.